Labdien visiem! Prieks jūs visus redzēt. Jā, paldies, es redzu, ka komentāros raksta, ka dzirdēt mani arī var. Dargie kolēģi, jā. Liels prieks jūs sveikt mūsu starptautiskajos Ziemas lasījumos, Tulkotāja meklējumi un atradumi. Un laiks skrien ļoti ātri, šie jau ir 7. lasījumi. Un šajos gados ir bijuši gan meklējumi, gan daudzi vērtīgi atradumi. Un arī šodien paredzēto tēmu klāsts apliecina, cik plaša ir tulkošanas jomā. Prieks, ka veidojas arvien ciešākā universitāšu un mūsu tulkotāju biedrības sadarbība, un mēs redzam, ka lasījumos piedalās gan Latvijas universitātes mācībspēki un tulkotāju biedrības biedri un pārstāvji, gan arī Latvijas universitātes Ventspils augstskolas un arī ārzemju šogad Triestes universitātes studenti. Pandēmija ir uzspiedusi savu zīmogu un konference notiek tiešsaiste, bet šķiet esam noilgojušies arī pēc klātienes pasākumiem un jau sākam plānot nākamo konferenci maijā, mūsu tradicionālo konferenci aktuāli jautājumi tulkojuma zinātne. Un mums ir prieks pateikt, ka uz pavasara konferenci jau ir piekritusi ierasties nu pat iznākušas tulkotas grāmatas Tulkojums un dzimte, tulkošana feminisma laikmeta autore, Kanādas Otavas universitātes profesore Luīza Fonflotova. Viņas grāmatu savulaik tulkojuši arī studenti, un viņu tekstu rediģētā veida esam izmantojuši priekšvārda un pirmās 2 nodaļas. Grāmatu latviešu valodā tulkojuši un rediģējuši Dācis Trilēvica Ošiņa un Dens Dimiņš. Nedaudz par grāmatu. Grāmatas temats ir tulkošanas un dzimtes jautājumu sarežģītas attiecības, un izlasot to, jūs gūsiet vēsturisku skatījumu uz to, kādas problēmas dzimtes pētnieces saskata valodā. Uzzināsiet, kā feminisma literatūra un idejas ir ietekmējušas tulkošanas praksi un kā feministiska dzimtes apzinīga skatījuma ietekme un uz tulkošanu, kā tas veidojas un kādas grūtības rodas tulkotājiem. Kanoniskos darbus tulkojot atkārtoti un arī par konkrētu darbu kritiskiem vērtējumiem, kādi tiek veltīti feministiskais un dzimtes apzinīgajai tulkošanai, nākotnes perspektīvām un citiem jautājumiem. Grāmatu papildina arī glosārijas ar tēmatam būtisko iedzienu un terminu skaidrojumu. Un grāmata būs noderīga studentiem, kas ar tulkošanas teorijām saskaras pirmo reizi, pasniedzējiem, kad cenšas iemācīt kritiskas domāšanas prasmi, un pētniekiem, kas meklē īsu pārskatu par tulkojumu zinātnes tagadni un nākotni. Grāmatu saviem lasītājiem ieteicis arī interneta žurnāls Satori. Vēlos vēl piebilst par māja konferenci, ka mēs ļoti ceram, ka viens no grāmatas tulkotājiem Dens Dimiņš piedalīsies konferencē un pastāstīs par to, kā gāja tulkošanas process. Mēs centīsimies arī uzrunāt studentus, kas bija pirmie, kas iztulkoja šo grāmatu, lai viņi padalās ar savu pieredzi. Jo noteikti tas ir aizraujošs stāsts. Un ņemot vērā, ka būs arī pašas profesoras Fonflotovas priekšlasējums, mēs ļoti ceram, ka izdosies izveidot konferences ietvaros sekciju ar jautājumiem, kas ir veltīti dzimtes terminoloģijai, tulkojumiem un visām saistītām tēmām. Tāpēc, ja jums ir interese vai kaut kādi pētījumi vai atziņas par šo tēmu, mēs ļoti gaidām jūsu pieteikumu. Un būs, protams, iespēja piedalīties arī ar citām tēmām. Un tā kā šoreiz mums tik tiešām ir starptautiskā konference ar dalībniekiem no ārzemēm, es centīšos arī teikt dažus vārdus viņiem, lai viņi saprot, kas notiek, un lai būs saprotams, kā mums sekot līdzi. So, dear participants, for those of you who do not understand Latvian, I'm going to say a few words in English. We are very happy to see you at this event, and it is wonderful that we have this cooperation and we can listen to the presentations of students, of teachers, and practitioners working in the field, and it's wonderful that we also have international participants. One thing I wanted to add is that this conference, as you can see, is an online event, but we all have grown tired of the pandemics and all these restrictions, and of course I'm sure we all would love to see each other and meet in real life. So we have another traditional conference in May, topical issues in translation studies, and we are planning it in a hybrid format. It will be possible to participate both here in Riga and also online. And one of the participants is Professor Luisa von Flotto, whose book was on translation and gender was recently translated and published in Latvia. So if you have a research or an abstract dealing with these issues, you can participate in this section. Otherwise, you are very welcome to participate with any other topic related to translation or terminology. And without further ado, I think we can start our conference. And the floor is given to our first speaker, Ingrid Klenhofer, who is going to talk about the translation of Arabic books, apparently. Jā, tātad vārds, mēs pārējām pie konferences, un vārds tiek dots pirmajai mūsu runātājai Ingridai Klenhofai, kas pastāstīs par arābu telēno valodu un tās tulkošanu. Lūdzu, Ingrida.
Paldies, paldies. Un patiešām radās jautājums, jo es it kā gatavoju šo prezentāciju latviešu valodā, un tas nozīmē, ka mūsu ārzemju klausītāji to nesapratīs. Vai man pāriet uz angļu valodu, jo man ir ļoti daudz piemēru tieši, kas tulkot latviešu valodā. Kā mēs šo jautājumu risināsim, lai viņiem nav gluži garlaicīgi?
Nu,
varbūt runāt angliski un tos piemērus pieminēt latviski, vai tad otrā puse citādi mani nesapratīs daži klausītāji no Latvijas. Tad lemiet jūs.
Nu, es domāju, ka mēs paliekam pie tā, kā mēs visi bijām gatavojušies. Ingrīda droši var runāt arī latviski, un, nu, ja tēma šķiet interesanta, gan jau pēc tam var sazināties un uzdot tos jautājumus atsevišķi. So I will briefly explain that the presentation will be in Latvian as it was prepared, but if anything catches your attention, you are free to ask your questions. You can use the comment section, or you will be given this opportunity after the presentation, and you, of course, can contact the presenter afterwards. Yes, Ingrida, the floor is yours.
Tātad, kā parasti, es stāstīšu par arābu valodas tulkošanas īpatnībām. Un sevišķu uzmanību vienmēr es esmu pievērsusi tieši daļliteratūras tulkošanai. Un jāsaka, šī interese radās agrā jaunībā, kad es ļoti interesējos par Āzijas kultūrām un izlasīju visu, kas bija lasāms vietējā bibliotēkā, gan japāņu, ķīniešu, arī arābu, persiešu literatūras tulkojumi tur bija, latviski un krieviski. Un man vienmēr izbrīnīja, kādēļ daži teksti skan ārkārtīgi pliekani, un es vispār nesaprotu, par ko tas ir. Palika tāda kā tukšuma sajūta, it kā karājoties gaisā un nesaprotot, vai tad tiešām tas sākotnējais teksts tāds bija. Nu, lūk, un tagad, pēc tik daudziem gadiem, 30 gadiem, kad es jau varu spēju lasīt oriģinālā arābu daļliteratūru un arī tulkot sava lekciju nodarbību vajadzībām, publikāciju vajadzībām, Es vācu piemērus, kad darbs ir principiāli netulkojams un meklēju šīs principiālās netulkojamības pazīmes, kas bieži rodas ne tikai no valodas stila, struktūras atšķirībām, bet ir kaut kas principiāli atšķirīgs pašā pamatā. Un šodien mēs tiekamies ar ļoti, vismaz man, interesantu saudarābu rakstnieku. Viņš ir visai jauns, Muhammads Hasans Alvāns. Jā, es tūlīt palielināšu. Muhammads Hasans Alvāns, 4 gadus par mani jaunāks, kurš tātad viņa pirmā izglītība ir datorikā, informācijas tehnoloģijās Saudarābijā, bet pēc tam viņš pievērsās literatūrai, rakstniecībai un ir uzrakstījis virkni ļoti īpatnēju romānu. Un, ja mēs palūkojamies uz šo jaunieti, kas izskatās eiropiešu, jaunieti, viņš ir jaunāks par mani, eiropiešu drēbēs tik varbūt mums tuvs un saprotams, sevišķi šis lielais attēls, tāds pats kā mēs, bet no otras puses mums ir jāsaprot, ka Saudarābijas kultūra ir ļoti atšķirīga tai ziņā, ka pirmkārt tā ir ļoti tradicionāla, tā ir izaugusi no senā tieši līča arābu kultūras kanona, no senākajām arābu literatūras tradīcijām, cienot arābu valodas unikālās īpašības, islāma literatūra, islāma retoriku. Un tātad šī vide, kurā uzauga Muhammads Hasans Alvāns, radikāli atšķiras. Un vēl mums jāņem vērā, ka Saudarābijā ir arī dzimumu segregācija, kas nozīmē, ka viņam vismaz sieviete ir kaut kas ārkārtīgi mīklains, tas eviguaiblihe, mūžīgi sievišķīgais. Saudarābijā patiešām eksistē, jo īstenībā sieviete vienmēr ir tālāk nekā šeit rietumu sabiedrībā, kur tā var būt kolēģe, var kopā iet izpeldēties, var kopā aiziet iedzert pat kafiju, pat alu, vai ne? Gandrīz tādi paši kā mēs cilvēki. Un lūk, paskatīsimies, kas tad notiek ar šo daļradi. Te mēs redzam to pašu Muhammadu Hasanu Alvānu jau tradicionālākā tērpā un tradicionālākā vidē, un sākam nojaust, ka varbūt viņš tomēr nav tāds kā mēs. Un atšķirot viņa darbus, mēs uzduramies, vismaz, lūk, es pētīju arābu emigrācijas literatūru, un es sāku lasīt viņa romānu, ko sauc Sakful Kifāja. Un redziet, es nesapratu, ko šis nosaukums vispār nozīmē. Un sāku domāt, varbūt es tikai nesaprotu, vai ne? Un tāpēc uzdevu arābiem jautājumus. Un kas ir interesanti, ka arābi atbildēja man tā, lai saprastu nosaukumu, ir jālasa viss darbs. Jo viņš ir lietojis arābu valodas daudz nozīmību, lai radītu tādu nosaukumu, ko var saprast kaleidoskopiski, jebkurā veidā, tātad atkarīgi no konteksta. Un šeit, angliski tas tika tulkots kā the ceiling of sufficiency, proti burtiski. Bet patiesībā as-sakf tiešām ir griesti, bet to var saprast arī kā limits, kā robeža. Un šis kifēja var būt gan tas, cik cilvēks var paciest, gan kaut kāds krājums, ko cilvēks sakrāja, gan labklājība, gan izturība. Un izlasot šo grāmatu, es domāju, ka drīzāk tas būtu jāsauc par izturības robežu vai pēdējo robežu, jo tieši es atradu, kurā lappusē šis citos vārdos tiek apspriest. Tātad. Citi Muhammada Hasana Alvāna darbi arī izceļas ar ļoti daudz nozīmīgiem nosaukumiem. Piemēram, Tulkotāja, tas būtu tiešām apkakle, vai arī loks, apvalks. Un tahāra ir rituālā tīrība, šķīstība, gluži reliģisks koncepts ar savām konotācijām, kas rietumu sabiedrībā nav pieejami. Tā, pat ar to Al-Kundus, to slaveno romānu bebrs, arī arābu valodā šis vārds var nozīmēt 3 dzīvnieciņus patiesībā. Tātad vai nu bebrs, vai nu ūdrs, vai nu vispār tāds gofers, un tāpēc arī jālasa romāns. Un pat romāns, kas izklausījās visvienkāršāk nosaukts Sofija, Sūfija. Patiesībā, ja ņem vērā viņa nākamo darbu, kas ir Maza nāve, Maut un Sagīr, kas tika nesen tulkots, vēl nav izdots angļu valodā, kā Ibn Arabis Small Death, kas par šī izcilā Andalūzijas zinātnieka. Viņš bija arī sūfisma skolotājs, ļoti ietekmīgs. Mēs varam saprast, ka iespējams sūfija var nozīmēt arī ne tikai Sofiju, bet arī sūfisma piekritēju sieviešu dzimtē. Tāpēc, kā redzat, arābu valodā ir ļoti daudz vietas šādiem interesantiem, mainīgu nozīmi ieviešanai, kas tikai rada turpmāk māksliniecisko efektu un ko arābi uzskata par ļoti skaistu stilu. Pamanīju, starp citu, pētot viņa daļradi, ka internets ir pilns ar viņa citātiem Twitterī un Instagramā un visur, tātad, kā krievi saka, razabrāļi na citāti. Un viņa citātus lieto ļoti daudz kur. Piemēram, ļoti interesants tātad pāridarījumi un sirds sāpes un netaisnība, vai ne? Vai tu zini, cik bīstamas ir šīs lietas? Es šeit tulkoju ar visiem, te ir atzīmēts burtiskais tulkojums, kas ir neveikls, bet varbūt tas sniedz dažas nianses. Tātad, kā redzat, tās ir bīstamas, kas samilst un uzsprāgst, kā enerģija, kas nerodas ne no kā no tukšuma, bet pārvēršas par spridzekli. Tātad it kā ļoti vispārīgs prātojums, gudrības grauds, bet kādēļ gan šāda popularitāte un šādas literārās balvas un šāda atzīmība. Vēl interesanti citāts, ko arī es atradu, pat kāds bija pasvītrojis, nofotografējis, tātad mīlējis un cienījis. Un mūsu attiecības kopumā bija kā lidināšanās augstu debesīs, par ko nav varas gravitācijas likumiem, ne vēja virzieniem. Izskatās kā kāds ļoti tāds romantisks daļš stils. Un te mēs nonākam pie jautājuma, kāda daļliteratūra arābu valodā tiek uzskatīta par daļu. Es no Nacionālās enciklopēdijas salīdzinājumam atradu, ka redzat šeit tēlaina un greznota izteiksme, kurā tiek lietoti tropi un stilistiskās figūras, un kas 17. un 19. gadsimtā klasicismā tika uzskatīta par tātad, ka daļdarbs ir jo vērtīgāks, jo daļāka, greznotāka ir tā valoda. Un arābu valodā vēl līdz šim pastāv šīs normas, proti literārā stila, tas ir tulkots no arābu valodas stilistikas grāmatas. Ja? Daļums ir tā pamatiezīme un visredzamākā īpašība. Un tā daļums rodas no burvīgas izdomas un detalizētām sajūtu gleznām un neparastiem salīdzinājumiem un jēgas ietērpšanas sajūtu gleznās. Proti, jo neparastāks salīdzinājums, jo vairāk darbā ir daļrunības, vārdu spēles un tīras beduīnu senās klasiskās arābu valodas, tieši šīs tīrās senās klasiskās valodas, ko mūsdienās lieto tikai literatūrā, jo labāks ir šis darbs. Un vēl labāk, ja daudzus vārdus nevar saprast, tie ir atrodami tikai skaidrojošās vārdnīcās. Sinonīmi no senarābu dzejas, piemēram. Balāga jeb daļrunība, retorika valodā. Cik skaisti tas ir teikt arābu retorikas mācību grāmatā, ka tā rodas no iedzimtas, intuitīvas daļā izpratnes attīstības caur izciliem literāriem piemēriem. Un mēs te pārlecam un skatāmies, ka balāgas 3 zinības, tas ļoti ātrs pārskats. Tātad pirmkārt, protams, ir jāpasaka nozīme precīzi, bet arī šī ir jāprot skaidri izteikt savu domu, lietojot tieši tropus un figūras, un pie tam vēl ir jāizgrezno teksts ar daļrunības ziediem. Tā ir burvīguma zinātne, kas, manuprāt, ir nākusi tieši no antīkās retorikas, proti izgreznojuma joma. Nu, ja mēs runājam par tropiem, tur gandrīz tas pats, kas mums, tas pats mantojums, bet šeit ir, es nekavēšos šeit. Es vienkārši vēlējos uzsvērt, ka šādi izgreznojumi valodā tiek uzskatīti par kaut ko pozitīvu. Cik es sapratu, kā man mācīja angļu valodā, piemēram, lieki izgreznojumi, paralēlismi tiek uzskatīti pat par sliktu stilu, kas drīzāk ir iederīgi karaļa Džeimsa Bībeles versijā, bet tie nav iederīgi mūsdienu literatūrā. Nu, varbūt kaut kur dzejā. Pat dzejā tas sāk iznīkt. Tas ir, kaut kas no 17. 19. gadsimta dzejas. Tātad var teikt, ka arābu literatūrā ir ļoti skaisti atkārtot to pašu vārdu dažādās nozīmēs, kā mēs teiktu gailis, kas dzied, un šautens gailis. Vai varu. Tātad, ko varu, ķīmisku elementu, vai varu, es varu. Un to salikt vienā teikumā, lai cilvēkam ir ko padomāt. Vai tas ir varš vai varēšana. Tālāk savirknējot līdzīgi skanošus vārdus, latviski tas būtu plūkt un plēst, piemēram. Vai, teiksim, tās pašas vārdu saknes atvasinājumi. Pūzdams pūta, skriedams skrēja un tā tālāk. Atskaņas, aliterācijas, asonances, to es nemaz neminēšu. Un vēl man ļoti pievērs uzmanību šis taurija. Ja piemin kādu vārdu, kam ir divas nozīmes, un tā vairāk lietotā, nav lietotā runātāja domāta, bet ir domāta tā mazāk zināmā un mazāk lietotā. Tātad paralelismi, pārspīlējumi un tā tālāk. Un te mēs paskatīsimies, kā tas darbojas, ja mēs raugām tulkot šo te skaisto tekstu. Es to nelasīšu arābu valodā, ja vēlaties tomēr nolasīšu, jo tas skaisti skan, bet iedomājieties šo tēlu, un es domāju, ka šeit ir ne tikai valodas problēma un ne tikai stila problēma, bet šeit ir tieši tas atsaucas uz mūsu, ko pieminējāt šīs konferences sākumā, feminisma kritikā. Tas vairs nav pieņemams laikam, tēlot sievieti kā kaut ko stihisku, emocionālu, auglīgu, tumšu, vai ne? Tātad kā Muhammads Alvans tēlo mīlestību? Tu nebiji parasta sieviete, un tādēļ mana mīlestība pret tevi nemaz nevarēja būt parasta ikdienišķa. Tu biji plūdi, kas sev līdzi aizrauj visus raižu kokus un spriedzes un piesardzības laukakmeņus. Un pie tam šeit es nespēju pārnest attarauvī, kur jūs redzat tomēr šī burvīguma zinātnes ietekme ir. Tu nāci kā rītausmas seja, kā rītausmas vilnis pat varbūt, kas liek krist vai liek zust, izplēnēt, mēs drīzāk teiktu, garās nakts biediem. Tu biji nolaidusies uz pamestas planētas, kā tekstā pieres virsmas, un tavās rokās bija ūdens, tātad, un šeit radījumi visa dzīvā radība un jauns saules ritums. Tā kā redzat, kā viņš tēlo savu mīļoto sievieti. Turpmāk tēlojot, kā jūs redzat šo te arābu literāro stilu darbībā, tātad, man te zoom aizklāja. Tātad, vienbrīsniņa, vētrainā sievišķības pieeja. Tur nu gan feminisma kritikai ir ko teikt, kas nesniedz parādībām to skaidrojumus, bet tajā pašā laikā rada jaunus virzienus dzīves kartē. liek dzimt tautām un kultūrām, tā maina dzimšanas datumus un nakšu atgriešanos vai ieradumus, nekā nezinu daudznozīmīgi. Un sapņus, kas ir piekarināti pie dienas sienas, un klusuma un runāšanas likumus, un mūžsenos sirdspukstu ritmu. Es pat nezinu, kur latviešu literatūras tradīcijā kaut kas tāds iederētos. Nu, varbūt Imanta Ziedoņa darbos, nu, kaut kādas epifānijas vai Kārļa Skalbes darbi, vai ne? Bet tā ir izcili dzejiska valoda, mazliet, kas izklausās senlaicīgi 21. gadsimtā, kas ir arī saistīta ar diezgan mūsdienās laikam neaktuālām dzimumu lomām. Tā, tūliņ, tā. Un lūk kāds tēls, mīlestība, sagrauj vai saberž mani līdz pat pēdējai šūnai, ko apciemo manas asinis. Tad tā savāc manis atlūzas, drupačas, viņš ir sabiris drupatās, sakopo manus vai apkopo manus atomus un samīca mani kā maizes mīklu no jauna, kā jaunu cilvēku, citu cilvēku, oriģinālā jaunu vīrieti, kas latviešu valodā nevar būt lietotas, jo latviešu valodā ir cits nozīmes. Lūk, šī mīlestības stihiskais spēks pretēji loģikai. Un vēl interesanti, ka ir diezgan šādiem domu graudiem vai atziņām līdzīgi teikumi, ko tiešām var lietot kā citātus dažādās situācijās, kā pravieti Džibrāna Halīla. Ja? Piemēram, kas ir interesanti šeit, manas vīrišķīgās vajadzības pēc sievietes. Tas izklausās diezgan divdomīgi latviešu valodā, vai ne? Ka tu biji vienkārši mana pēdējā robeža, aiz kuras vairs nevēlos nekā no visām manām vīrišķīgajām vajadzībām pēc sievietes. Oriģinālā tas ir domāts ļoti šķīsti, viņa dvēseliskā vēlēšanās būt kopā ar sievieti. Jā. Un šeit, piemēram, domu grauds, tādēļ mīlestība nemaz nebija lēmums, ko es centos vai tiecos pieņemt, bet tas bija liktenis, kas centās paņemt mani. Love was not a decision that I was seeking to take, as much as it was fate seeking to take me. Un tas ļoti skan arābu valodā. Tā. لم يكن الحب قرارا أسعى لأخذه بقدر ما كان قدرا يسعى لأخذه. Kā jūs redzat, ka šeit atkārtojās līdzīgs vārdu skanējums un īstenojās visas šīs daļās literatūras normas. Nu, un tas ir faktiski pēdējais, ko vēlējos parādīt. Tātad šeit ir arī doma, ka mīlestība tā saplūst ar neprātu. Tātad veltīgie skribelējumi uz kartes ir viņa domas, visi virzieni un galam ved uz viņu mīļoto sievieti, interesanti salīdzinājumi. Tātad metaforiski, vārdu sakot, šī grāmata ir viens liels metaforu krājums, metaforā sapludinātas viena otrā. Pārejošas, piemēram, vēlmes, kuras šūkojas mūža gados, es pat nevaru iedomāties, kā to latviski iztulkot, tur ir ilgi jādomā. Vai gaidu loki. Jā. Nu, un, protams, sieviete, kas var pasprukt vaļā no vīrieša un aizbēgt, kā aizbēg mākoņi debesīs. Tātad tas laikam būtu īsumā viss šajā īsajā laikā, kas mums bija atvēlēts, un atkārtojot šo galveno domu, es domāju, ka patiešām šādi darbi no tik atšķirīgām kultūrām ir drīzāk atzejojami nekā vienkārši tulkojami. Tātad tā drīzāk ir dzejas, nevis prozas tulkošana. Un darbs ir faktiski jāpārraksta no jauna, izvēloties kādu iederīgu literāru darbu kā paraugu. Es domāju, ka tiešām man šeit liekas Imants Ziedonis tuvākais, varbūt es maldos. Jā, ar arhaisku pieskaņu. Un tiešām es ceru, ka kādu dienu man būs iespēja un laiks beidzot kaut ko iztulkot un varbūt pat publicēt jau gatavu, vismaz paralēlos tekstos, lai mums būtu kāds ieskats tik tālās kultūrās un domāšanas veidos, kas varbūt arī palīdzēs labāk saprast šīs kultūras pārstāvjus. Ar mazu piebildi, tik tiešām līča angļu valoda atspoguļo šīs valodas īpatnības, kas tiek uzskatītas par labām arābu retorikā. Nu, tas laikam bija viss, un liels paldies par uzmanību.
Liels paldies. Vai ir kādi jautājumi? Are there any questions maybe in English as well? Nu, šķiet, ka jautājumu nav. Paldies. Nu, un lai izdodas tas tulkojums, varu iedomāties, cik daudz laika un enerģijas tas prasīs, bet nu, cerams, ka kādreiz varēsim izlasīt.
Nu, tas drīzāk tāds hobijs ir mūsdienās, jo komerciālā ziņā tas absolūti nav attaisnots. Tāpēc, kā saka, tas ir kaut kas kā spilvena izšūšana dzīvojamai istabai drīzāk.
Jā.
Sirsnīgs jums paldies.
Paldies jums. Mēs turpinām. Ingrīde, es jums atslēgšu mikrofonu, vai jūs pati atslēgsiet? Jā, paldies.
Es atslēdzu.
Aha, paldies. Jā, nākamā mūsu prezentācija ir par tiesu tulku darba aspektiem. Nu, un uzreiz gribu pateikt, ka, diemžēl, mūsu nākamā runātāja Viktorija Prituļāka nevarēja šodien piedalīties, tāpēc pēc prezentācijas par tiesu tulku darbu sekos Sindijas Samahvalovas prezentācija. Es viņu vienkārši informēju, lai viņa jau uzreiz var sākt nervozēt. Nu, un gatavoties arī tā. Nākamā prezentācija, jā. So the next presentation is the presentation prepared by our Latvian Association of Translators and Interpreters. It deals with the work of court interpreters. The presentation is in English, but I'm going to speak Latvian. And if you have any questions, you will be able to read it. If there is anything you wanted to ask additionally, do not hesitate to ask. Tā, nu, es ceru, ka prezentācija ir redzama. Un prezentācijas autore vēl viena kopā ar mani ir mana kolēģe Svetlana Lana Zariņa, kas arī ir Latvijas tulkotāju biedrības biedra aktīva un arī tulkotāja, kas ilgus gadus strādā un tulko tiesību sargājošajām iestādēm. Bet runāšu šodien es. Gribētos sākt ar tādu citātu no grāmatas, kas parāda, kādas ir grūtības tulkojot tiesas procesu un cik sarežģīts un svarīgs ir tulka darbs, lai ietaupītu laiku, es varbūt skaļi nelasīšu. Kas ir jāsaprot par tiesu tulka darba īpatnībām saskaņā ar LU, kas ir Eiropas asociācija, kas apvieno juridiskos un tiesu tulkus tulkotājus. Tulkojot tiesai ir jāizmanto dažādas tulkošanas, mutiskas tulkošanas tehnikas un paņēmienus ir jātulko gan secīgi, gan sinhroni, gan čukstus, un reizēm arī ir tā saucamais site translation, tātad mutiskais tulkojums no lapas, kad tulko rakstīto tekstu, un mērķis ir tam visam nodrošināt optimālo komunikāciju šajā tiesas sēdē attiecīgai. Un saskaņā arī ar ētikas kodeksu nedrīkst tulki uzņemties darbu, ja viņiem tam nav nepieciešamo kompetenci, ja nav iemaņu, ja viņi pilnībā nepārvalda valodu vai priekšmetu, vai ja viņi nav spējīgi nodrošināt kvalitatīvu darbu tādēļ, ka, piemēram, viņiem nav laika sagatavoties šim darbam, bet par sagatavošanos mēs vēl parunāsim, tas nav tik viennozīmīgi. Pašreizējā situācijā Latvijā, šis ir citāts no raksta, kas ir izvietots LV portāls LV, jūs redzat arī saiti uz šo nelielo rakstu. Šobrīd tiesās tulko gan štata tulki, gan arī ārpakalpojumu sniedzēji, līgumtulki vai freelanceri, runājot tā vairāk žargona. Latvijas tiesās tagad ir 85 štata vietas, un šie ir tulki, kas tulko latviešu-krievu valodu kombinācijā, un pārējās valodas tad nodrošina ārpakalpojumu sniedzēji. Likumos mums nav nekādu prasību attiecībā uz tulkiem, it īpaši uz šiem līgumtulkiem, ārpakalpojumu sniedzējiem. Ir tāda vesela saprāta konteksta prasības, ka, protams, ka ir jābūt vecākam par 18 gadiem, nedrīkst būt ieinteresēts lietas iznākuma un, protams, ka ir jāpārvalda valoda. Es personīgi tiesās tulkoju, liekas, jau kopš 8. gada, regulāri, un pēdējos 3 gadus es pat teiktu, ka ļoti bieži. Un tas, ko es vairāk kārt esmu dzirdējusi no tiesu darbiniekiem, no tiesas sēžu sekretāriem un reizēm pat no tiesnešiem, ka var nākt arī kuru cilvēku, kas pārvalda latviešu un krievu valodu, nekā tur sarežģīta nav, speciāla izglītība nav vajadzīga. Tas, protams, negatīvi ietekmē profesijas prestīžu un procesu kopumā. Mēģinot atrast kaut kādas prasības, ko izvirza štata tulkiem, es atradu tādu vakanci, kur jūs varat redzēt, ka tiek prasīta augstāka izglītība humanitārais vai sociālais zinātnes, latviešu valodas prasme, krievu valodas zināšanas, un tad komunikācijas spējas, office programmu lietošana, tāpēc, ka jāveic arī rakstiskie tulkojumi un nekas cits. Netiek prasītas kaut kādas iemaņas mutiski tulkot, vai vispār tulkošana īsti nav pieminēta. Un šobrīd situācija ir tāda, ka civilu lietās un administratīvajās lietās ir tiesības lietas dalībniekiem izmantot tulka pakalpojumus, ja viņi nepārvalda brīvi valsts valodu, bet tad viņi par tulku maksā paši. Un krimināla lietā valsts nodrošina tulku, tātad tiesu administrācija tulku nodrošina gadījumu, ja tulkojums ir nepieciešams. Mēs paskatījāmies, kāda ir situācija dažādās valstīs attiecībā uz tulku reģistru gadījumu, ja cilvēkam pašam ir nepieciešams tulks civila procesa, kā šādu tulku var atrast. Un kā ir ar tiesām, ja nav štata tulks, tad kā viņi meklē ārpakalpojuma sniedzēju. Eiropas Savienībā situācija ir atšķirīga dažādas dalību valstis. Vairuma valstis gan ir jāsaka, ir kaut kāds reģistrs, ir datubāze. Te jūs varat redzēt dažādus piemērus, un mūsu kaimiņiem, Igauniem, tā kā viņiem ir jau vairākus gadus zvērināto tulku institūts, viņiem ir attiecīgi zvērināto tulku reģistrs, ko nodrošina un uztur Tieslietu ministrija. Te ir vēl daži piemēri. Ir gan atsevišķas tiesas, gan Tieslietu ministrijā, gan tulku un tulkotāju biedrības un asociācijas, kas nodrošina šo sarakstu, bet tas ir pieejams jebkura gadījumā. Un ir arī citas valstis, tajā skaitā arī Latvija, kur nav nekāda reģistra, nekādas datubāzes vai mājaslapas. Tātad ir jāmeklē pašiem un nav zināms, kāds tad ir zināšanu un prasmju līmenis attiecīgajam tulkam. Kādi ir galvenie izaicinājumi saistībā ar tiesu tulkošanu? Mēs izpētījām arī ārzemju pieredzi, un faktiski šis teksts ir ņemts no ASV organizācijas mājaslapas, kur viņi norāda, kādas viņiem ir problēmas, un palasot arī citu valstu materiālus, var redzēt, ka šīs problēmas un šie izaicinājumi ir vienādi. Un arī mūsu situācijā, mūsu valstī to pašu var redzēt. Ir problēma ar certifikāciju, mums nav problēmas, mums nav nekādas certifikācijas. Pietrūkst retējām valodām tulku un vispār valodu pratēju. Vēl viena problēma ir saistīta ar to, ka nevar paredzēt nepieciešamību pēc tulka, un tad, mūžīga problēma visiem ir finansējuma trūkums un tas, ka nevar paredzēt, nevar plānot darbu, reizēm atceļ pēdējā brīdī, reizēm arī ieliekties sēdi pēdējā brīdī. Šeit autors tā emocionāli uzrakstīja, ka darba saraksts tiesu tulkiem ir īsts murgs visam iesaistītām pusēm. Kādi izaicinājumi ir pašiem tulkiem? Protams, ka pietrūkst materiālu, lai sagatavotos sēdē, un bieži vien tas ir saistīts ar vai no izmeklēšanas noslēpumu, vai ar to, ka īsti nevar radīt citam cilvēkam šos sensitīvos datus un materiālus. Arī tad, kad tas, ka pietrūkst laika. Es šobrīd runāju vairāk par ārpakalpojumu sniedzējiem, bet es nekad neesmu strādājusi par štata tulku tiesā. Varu tikai iedomāties, kādi ir darba apstākļi, bet spriežot pēc tā, kas ir dzirdēts no kolēģiem, iespējams, ka arī nav īsti laika pārlasīt visus lietas materiālus pirms sēdes, tāpēc, ka ir daudz cita darba. Tā, laikam es uz nepareizo nospiedu, jā. Vēl ir jāatzīmē grūtības, kas ir saistītas ar valodu. Protams, ka ir jautājumi par terminoloģiju, gan jāpārzina juridiska terminoloģija, gan būtu vēlams zināt terminoloģiju jebkurā cita joma, jo nekad nevar zināt, kas tieši būs vajadzīgs kādā tiesas sēdē, vai kādi muitas termini, vai celtniecības termini, vai kaut kādas zināšanas ķīmijas jomā un medicīna un tā tālāk. Vēl, protams, ir svarīgi uzturēt attiecīgo runas reģistru un visu atveidot pareizi. Es varbūt nekavēšos šeit, ieraksts būs pieejams, varēs izlasīt. Un vēl ir izaicinājumi, kas ir saistīti ar to, ka nav iespējas īsti paaugstināt kvalifikāciju un nav mums veida, kā var apmācīt jaunus tulkus, kā viņiem iziet kaut kādu prakses stažēšanos. Par to mēs vēl arī parunāsim. Par prasībām, ko izvirza tiesu tulkiem, protams, ka jebkurā citā jomā ir jābūt šai precizitātei, ir jātulko vārds vārdā, kā ir rakstīts daudzos dokumentos, ko tulki pirms tulkošanas paraksta, un ir jāmāk tulkot gan secīgi, gan sinhroni, gan čukstus. Protams, ka konfidencialitāte un neutralitāte ir ļoti svarīgi. Un vēl viena lieta, kas ir svarīga un ko reizēm ne visi ievēro, ir tas, ka ir jāaprobežojas tikai ar tulkošanu. Tulks ir tikai tulks nedrīkst sniegt kaut kādus padomus, kaut gan bieži vien iesaistītas personas, tā kā viņi komunicē ar tulku, viņi mēdz arī jautāt kaut kādus padomus tulkam. Tad, protams, nedrīkst tāda veida kaut ko ieteikt. Un mums arī ir pienākums attiecībā uz profesiju un kolēģiem. Tas nozīmē, ka ir nepieciešamas labas attiecības ar kolēģiem un ir jāpaukstina sava kvalifikācija un jāuzlabo savas prasmes. Un tagad gribēju parādīt, kā tas ir realitāte, kāda situācija šobrīd ir. Mēs sagatavojam aptauju tieši tiesu tulkiem, mēs to palaidām pirms dažām dienām, un šie, protams, ir provizoriskie rezultāti. Aptauja vēl turpinās, un tad, kad mēs aptauju noslēgsim, rezultāti būs pieejami. Mēs gan prezentēsim kādā no konferencēm, gan arī publicēsim rakstu LTTB mājaslapā. Anketa ir paredzēta gan štata, gan ārštata tulkiem, kas tulko tiesās. Diezgan īsa anketa, 13 jautājumi. Un kādas ir pagaidu atbildes? Jāsaka, ka es analizēju sniegtas atbildes vakar, un šodien es apskatījos nākušos klāt jaunas atbildes, ko es, protams, nespēju iekļaut šajos slaidos, bet te jūs varat redzēt vecumu, un ievērojama daļa 40% ir vecumā no 41 līdz 50 gadiem, un otrā liela grupa ir no 31 līdz 40 gadiem. Zīmums tā kā mums vienmēr ir ar tulkošanas nozarē aptuveni visas, gandrīz visas aptaujas šo aptuvenu rezultātu arī uzrāda, ka ir 80% sievietes un 20% vīrieši. Mēs arī uzdevām jautājumus par izglītību, vai ir kāds diploms, kāda izglītība tulkošanas jomā, un te jūs redzat, ka 44% nav tādas izglītības, 25% ir maģistra grāds un 22% ir bakalaura grāds, un vēl ir 9%, kas norādīja, ka ir humanitārais zinātnes, bet nekluži tulkošana. Mēs arī jautājām, vai ir iegūta izglītība juridiskā. Un te var redzēt, ka 75% tādas izglītības nav. Ir daži cilvēki, kam ir vai nu bakalaura vai maģistra grāds jurisprudencē. Tālāk ir par darba pieredzi. Ņemot vērā, ka mums bija divas lielas grupas vecumā no 40 līdz 50 un no 30 līdz 40, var arī saprast, ka arī darba pieredze ir ievērojama. Ir ļoti liela grupa, kas strādā tieši tiesās no 10 līdz 14 gadiem, un ir vēl liela grupa, kas ir līdz 10 gadiem, vai no 2,4 vai 5,9 gadi. Un kopējā darba pieredze kā tulkotājiem, jūs redzat tādu vienmērīgāku sadalījumu. Pārsvarā cilvēkiem ir diezgan liela darba pieredze, 6 un vairāk gadi. Daudziem ir vairāk par 10, 15 gadiem. Darba valodas, protams, mums tiesās daudzi tulko latviešu krievu valodu kombinācijās, štata tulki tulko, cik es saprotu, tikai šajās valodu kombinācijās, reizēm nāk arī citas valodas. Un mēs uzdevām jautājumu, ar kādām grūtībām jūs saskaraties veicot mutisko tulkošanu tiesā, un jūs redzat, ka ļoti daudzi izvēlējas šādas atbildes. Slikta skaņas kvalitāte, ja notiek videokonferences režīma, ātrs runas temps, nav iespējas sagatavoties darbam, terminoloģija citas nozares un tulkošana ilgstoši bez pārtraukumiem, un tad pēdējais ir juridiska terminoloģija. Ir arī citi izaicinājumi un citas grūtības, bet tur bija varbūt pa vienam respondentam, kas uz tam norādīja. Jautājām arī, cik ilgi tad jūs tulkojat bez pārtraukuma, un iespējams, ka atbildes uz šo jautājumu ietekmēja pašreizējā pandēmija un pašreizējā epidemioloģiskā situācija, jo daudzas tiesās ievēro šo principu, ka var strādāt 2 stundas, un tad obligāti ir jātaisa pārtraukums. Un tāpēc gandrīz 40% norādīja, ka ir šī 1-2 stundas. 12% norāda, ka 3-4 stundas, un ceturtdaļa norāda tik ilgi, cik nepieciešams, tik ilgi, cik turpinās process. Jo, protams, ka tulks jau nekādu to nevar ietekmēt, un ja process turpinās, tulkam ir jātulko, diez vai viņš var palūgt pārtraukumu. Mēs arī pajautājām, vai darba vieta ir aprīkota, ir piemērota darbam. Un 35% norādīja, ka viņus darba vietā apmierina. 31% norādīja, ka neapmierina, īsti neprecizējot, kas tieši neapmierina. 15% norāda uz lietām, kas ir saistītas ar aprīkojumu, skaņu, ar to, ka vajadzētu varbūt tulkošanas kabīni, un 12% norādīja, ka būtu forši, ja tulkam būtu arī krēsls vai galds, uz kā rakstīt. Jā, un atbildot uz jautājumu par videokonferences režīmu, kādas ir grūtības, diezgan skaidrs, ka vairums norādīja uz problēmām ar skaņu. Bija arī cilvēki, kas norādīja, ka nepietiek iemaņu vai ka trūkst aprīkojuma. Un mēs arī jautājām, tas ir pēdējais jautājums, ko var uzlabot. Norādīja respondenti, ka uzlabot var tomēr darba apstākļus, skaņu un aprīkojumu. Bija diezgan liela grupa respondentu, kas norādīja uz to, ka vajadzētu kaut kā informēt, paziņot procesa dalībniekiem, kā notiek process ar tulku, kaut kā viņiem atgādināt, ka ir nepieciešamas pauzes, ka nevar īsti milzīgā ātrumā nolasīt savu debašu runu uz 10 lapām un gaidīt, ka tulks to visu iztulkos vārds vārdā. Reizēm arī tiesnešiem jāatgādina, ka jāvada process ņemot vērā tulka piedalīšanos, un bija tāda piezīme, ka paskaidrot procesa dalībniekiem, ka tulks nav trauceklis. Vēl viena diezgan ievērojama grupa norādīja, ka būtu noderīgi, ja varētu saņemt informāciju un materiālus, lai varētu sagatavoties sēdē. Varbūt, protams, ne visu konfidenciālo informāciju, bet vismaz lietas būtību, pantus, uzvārdus un skaitļus, jo reizēm tos grūti uztvert. Vēl būtu nepieciešams nodrošināt tulkiem profesionālu profesionālo pilnveidi, kvalifikācijas paaugstināšanos, varbūt kaut kādu stažēšanos. Pārtraukumi ir nepieciešami. Bija grupa, kas norādīja, ka var arī neko neuzlabot, bet algas palielināšanos varētu to visu kompensēt. Un vēl viens priekšlikums bija par normatīvo regulējumu, jo pašlaik nekāda regulējuma nav. Ir tikai viens likums, ja nemaldos, vai varbūt noteikumi par atlīdzību par tiesu tulkošanu. Un 20% norādīja, ka viņus viss apmierina un nekas nav jāuzlabo, kas, protams, ir pozitīvi forši, ka kolēģi ir apmierināti. Vēlos pateikties, protams, visiem tiem, kas jau piedalījās mūsu aptaujā, un ja jūs tulkojat tiesā kaut vai kā līgumtulks sniedzot ārpakalpojumus un neregulāri, ja jums ir šī pieredze, mums būtu ļoti svarīgi uzzināt jūsu viedokli, tā kā mūsu mājaslapā ir pieejama šī saites, palūkšu piedalīties aptaujā, un pēc tam jūs varēsiet uzzināt rezultātus un saprast kopējo ainu. Nu, te ir literatūras saraksts neliels, nezinu, vai ir jautājumi, un man tas ir viss. Paldies! Nebūs jautājumi, ja? Nu, labi, paldies. Tad mēs pārējām pie mūsu nākamā referāta, Sindija Samahvalo, translations of websites and official posts about equine wellness. The floor is yours.
I will try to share. Okay. How can I? Oh, okay. Can you see everything?
I think we can, yes.
Okay. Hello, my name is Sindija Samahvalo. I'm a student at the Faculty of Humanities, University of Latvia. And I will be telling you about translations of websites and official news posts about equine wellness. And in Latvian, this would be tīmekļa vietņu un oficiālu ziņu tulkojumu par zirgu labsajūtu. Here you can see the outline of my presentation, starting with a short introduction, theoretical and practical aspects needed for this type of translation, the types of translations and the methods used to achieve them, and of course the findings in both of the translations that I will be speaking of. A short introduction. Last year, I had the opportunity to translate a few websites, texts, and official posts from English to Latvian or Latvian to English. About me, I am a horse rider since I was 1 year old. So the topic of horses, their diseases, their health, equestrianism in general is something that I'm used to. So translating something related to this was, and of course is, an interest of mine. The specific translations that I will speak about here are to do with equine wellness, more specifically the website for a horse massage therapist and what she offers for her four-legged clients. And the other were online posts about the latest updates on the EHV1 neurological form that spread in competitions in Valencia, Spain in last year's spring. And the information needed to be sent in all languages across the national horse federations of each country in Europe, including Latvia. The theoretical aspects of translating websites. I would like to mention this because it's a theoretical aspect of translating websites in particular, and an approach I found best explains website translation is functionalism, because it stresses the functional appropriateness of the target text, where the translator creates a new text based on the source text as well as on the specifications outlined by the the person that needs the translation. Overall, the internet and its websites have become a huge textual platform with a variety of purposes, but it is possible to define the general purposes of some websites. For example, business/corporate websites, where there is a site that is committed to depicting a particular business, NGOs, nonprofit websites, which is the most straightforward path for reaching some potential contributors to give donations and to know more about the organization itself. E-commerce websites, which is understandable, where you can shop, and other websites such as educational websites, entertainment, and of course, social media. The explicit definition of the purpose of a culturally and linguistically adapted website is of great importance, because all linguistic and cultural choices that you as a translator make are dependent on it and are usually negotiated by the client and the translator. On the basis of a functionalist approach, it is possible to explain website translation as a production of a new website, which is targeted at another linguistic and cultural community and based on an existing website in accordance with the predefined purpose. And as for official news posts, I believe the same theory applies to them, as news are posted in a website, but it's maybe a bit more informational, and there's less restriction as to how you format your text. Practical aspects needed for this type of translation and its terminology. When doing these translations, the most useful tool for the website translation was Thesaurus, because a lot of words were known to me, but I thought that they were not suitable to the meaning that I wanted to convey to the audience that would be reading the text. As for the terminology, a lot of words were, again, known to me, but I needed to change the meaning, as some terms were to do with horse anatomy. The official news posts overall were harder to translate, mainly because as soon as they were sent to me, I needed to translate them. For these posts, I used some translation tools to help me translate faster, but mainly my own knowledge as to make them as clear as possible. And then I sent them to the Latvian Horse Federation for reading and publication. Terminology here was completely formal as to what I had encountered in the website for the massage therapist. The hardest terminology translations were about the disease itself, its prevention, and the variety of symptoms that it may have. Types of translations and the methods used to achieve them. I think the website was a commercial and technical type of translation, because it included some aspects of business, and also the translation needed some specific knowledge in the area of knowing horses. The official news posts, I believe, were medical and legal type translations, because there were translations of medical issues such as the disease itself, and of course horse anatomy, as you needed to know what's happening to the horse. This translation can also be considered a bit of legal type of translation, because it required translation of documents relating to the law and the legal processes as to how things should be done in the case of quarantine and transportation of the horses outside of the competition grounds. Translation methods. As for the methods, the most common ones I used were borrowing, where the words or expressions are taken directly from the source text and are carried over into the target language. For example, cavaletti, which is a word that you could say kārtiņas, but then it would be poles and it wouldn't make sense. Literal translation, where each word is translated directly. Transposition, which involves a shift from one grammatical category into another. Modulation, which is a change of perspective, adjusting what has been written in order to express the same idea but preserve the meaning. Or adaptation, which is also known as cultural substitution, where some cultural elements of the source language are replaced with an equivalent. Findings of the translation in the translation of a website for a horse massage therapist. Here, the main method used was literal translation with some instances of borrowing, modulation, and adaptation. As I mentioned, the cavaletti. The source text currently is unavailable, so I won't be using direct examples. Some interesting findings for me personally were, for example, about the horse rehabilitation, where massage and passive movements are used, cavaletti masterclasses, which are about learning the use of cavaletti poles, individually suited to your horse and what he needs at the time, and to help reach goals for sport, hobby, or rehabilitation as well. A thing I found interesting was shoulder and plaits, which is that shoulder in horse anatomy would be the whole shoulder of the horse, but the plaits would be a different thing in Latvian. So there's a sort of difference, and you need to know them if you, for example, want to work with this type of text. The massage therapist's method of work were interesting as well. For example, the Masterson method, which is based on light touch techniques by taking action on the horse's body with a slight pressure that activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Working with the fascia as well, which is working with the connective tissues that enclose muscles, as well as ligaments and tendons. And also the explanation of what the horse massage therapist offers for her clients, how much time what may take, and how much each session costs. Here I have found some useful picture of the benefits of horse massage therapy. Working with the muscles of horses overall is at first a difficult task, because horses do not tell you what they like or what hurts them. But with time, this circle of benefits can be implemented. Also, I would like to mention that it was easier for me to translate after the massage therapist visited one of my horses, and then I could understand more what she does. Massage therapists usually start with techniques that reduce inflammation and improve circulation, and then they move towards techniques that improve joint mobility and so on. Findings of the translation of official news posts about EHV1, the neurological form. The main method here again was literal translation. Overall, there are 5 types of EHV virus, but the one discussed here is EHV1, the neurological form, which work like the signs are that there's a mild hind limb ataxia, which is lack of coordination and inability to void the bladder properly. There's weakness in the hind limbs, severe enough to cause difficulty in rising. So yeah, horses can't get up. In Latvian, I found a translation. It could alpha herpes virus 1 would be zirgu dzimtas alpha herpes vīrus 1. Some interesting findings of the translations are, for example, stabling, which I translated as staļļvietas, healthy/recovered horses, vesels atvesļojušos zirgus, strain of EHV1, EHV1 paveids. They in Latvian tend to leave this EHV1 the same as it is. In English, confirmed related outbreaks, saistīti uzliesmojumi, stringent biosecurity, stingriem bioloģiskās drošības protokoliem. At first, the person that checked translation wanted noteiktiem vai obligātiem bioloģiskās drošības noteikumiem vai protokoliem. But in the end, I think they left it as stingriem because it made more sense. And here are some translations of the secretary of Sabrina Ibanez, for example, clearly identified. Yes, my dog. Skaidri noteikti epidemioloģiskie riska faktori, equine fatalities, zirgu nāves gadījumi, hugely disruptive, ļoti graujoši ietekmē. I was not sure about graujoši, but I think it was the best choice. Alleviate, atvieglot. I also maybe could have used pretende, not mērķe, but I think they also left it as mērķe. Conclusions. The theoretical aspects of translating websites and official news posts are similar, as both include the understanding of functional appropriateness of the target text. For website translation, most useful tool was Thesaurus, and translation of the official news post was harder overall, as I've mentioned. The website was a commercial and technical type translation, and the official news posts were medical and legal type translations. For both the translations, the main method was literal translation, and I believe the most interesting translation was about EHV1. Here are some of the references, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Are there any questions or comments? If not, we can continue. Thank you, Cynthia. We will continue with our next presentation by Luisa Karlivane, The Challenges of Translating for Cinema and TV When Things Go South.
Atvainojiet, vai es varētu lūdzu prezentēt pēc nākošā runātāja?
Let's check. So Luisa would prefer to present later on. Could Gianluca present now?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, sorry about this.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Let me just share my screen. Okay, you can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, so. Sovracandido vel, cinta d'oliva, donna m'apparve sotto verde manto, vestita di color di fiamma viva. In white veil, with olive wreath, a virgin in my view appeared, beneath green mantle, robed in hue of living flame. Dante Alighieri, Purgatorio. This is how Dante describes the figure of Beatrice when he first sees her in in the Purgatorio. And of course, we can start noticing some little problems with the translation. Dante says candido vel, a white veil, and yet candido means also pure somehow. And then what is this color of a living flame? Is it red or krasny if you speak Russian? Maybe it's sarkans if you speak Latvian, or if you're Italian like me, probably it's going to be rosso. And yet you will surely agree that red and krasny and rosso and sarkans are just words, and words are like actors. They can play many, many parts, as Shakespeare would say. So as you might have noticed, my presentation will be about the translation of color. You see, generally, students, when they study translation in university, are not taught to look for the answer, but more to look for the question. Generally, to translate a text, the finest tool that we can use is a question. And so many translators throughout history have emphasized this, Cicero and Schleiermacher and so many others. So today I want to give you some tools, some questions that you can use for your future translations of color, so as to reflect better on what you are doing. So mainly, I will not give you answers. I will be giving you questions and issues. These are the main topics that I am going to tackle: semiotic issues and translation issues with color. So for the semiotic issues, we will be discussing the referent, the thought, and the symbol of the color. And for the translation issues, we will try and tackle every form of translation that humans generally practice. And possibly not only humans. We have endolinguistic, interlinguistic, and intersemiotic translation. We will start with the semiotic issues. I don't know how many of you are acquainted with the semiotic triangle, but just to give you a very brief introduction, every sign, so every communicative unit, is made up of 3 levels: the level of the referent, which is the true cat in the external reality, the idea, the thought, which is the idea of cat, and generally we use high commas to define it, and then we have the symbol, the word, which is generally given in italics. First of all, we have a problem to define the referent when we talk about color. Where does color actually lie? Is it in the object? Is it in the radiation that is rejected by the object? Is it in the electric matrix of processes, of neurological processes in the mind? Or is it the projection, so the sensorial image that is produced in the mind? But anyway, I think that we all can agree that once we establish a common criterion of reference for what the referent of color is, then translation can come very easily. But the main problem generally with semiotic triangles of colors is the thought. Is it really the same for everyone? When I say green, for example, is there a prototypical shade of green? Is there an ideal green? And what about blind, colorblind people? So now I might ask some of you, if somebody wants to reply to my question, do you think you have among these shades of green a prototypical one, maybe the first one, the fourth one? Would somebody like to give a comment? Okay, I will take that as a no. So I will just say that my prototypical shade is probably this one or this one. And yet so many people that I have interviewed have given me such different results. So actually, the prototypical shade varies from person to person. And then we have another problem with the thought, which is, what are the main associations when I say green? Generally, people think of plants, and if so, which ones? Ferns, oak trees, simple grass, I don't know. But is it possible that some cultures have codified color in a different way? Is it possible that they think of reptiles or amphibians, maybe poisonous ones, maybe dangerous ones, and which ones? Snakes, turtles, who knows? Then we move to the symbol. Also, the symbol is a big problem. We know that every language codifies the symbol in an extreme variety of ways. For yellow, for example, we have jaune, sare, citrino, amarello, giallo, jolti, amarillo, bull, sarga, etc., etc. There are so many possibilities depending on the language. But this is not the main concern, because it is also possible to refer to color through non-verbal symbols. For example, this is an insalata caprese. It's a famous Italian salad. And many chefs have pointed out that this salad somehow contains the colors of the Italian flag. And if some intellectual chef were to make a dish in which these colors represent the idea of a nation or a flag, then food would be a symbol for color, which would be a symbol for a flag, which would be a symbol for a nation. So we have semiotic overlapping, and this can result in many problems in translation. And it's not all. There is also the possibility of representing abstract concept through color. For example, in English, we have this expression, which is, it's a black or white situation. It means it's either this or that. And then there is the idea of the gray zone. It's kind of a blurred, confused situation, not very clear. So color does not only stand by color. We move on to translation issues. We have endolinguistic translation, which is within the same language boundaries. And we have interlinguistic translation, so between two or more languages. And then we have intersemiotic translation. Intersemiotic translation is between two different representation systems, two different kinds of sign groups. For example, if we wanted to use a color to define a city, of course, the color of Bordeaux would be referring to the city in France, Bordeaux, just to make a very, very brief example. Starting with endolinguistic translation, many languages, including Italian, for example, but generally Romance languages, have this concept of variatio, or variatio, if you prefer in classical pronunciation of Latin, which means that when you write, we tend to vary the language. So these are the three words that are listed by dictionaries as synonyms of color orange: arancione, arancio, and aranciato. So you can clearly see that I put a little question mark after aranciato, and I am going to explain why. So arancione and arancio are pretty much the same. I would say that they are perceived the same, at least in their denotation. But aranciato really sounds like a famous drink, which is aranciata, and I don't know whether it might be possible, maybe, for example, if we are trying to vary a language, to use aranciato instead of arancione or arancio without sounding weird. But it is not the only problem with these three words, because also frequency matters. Through the last 20 years, arancione and arancio have exchanged roles. It means that arancio used to be more used than arancione, whereas arancio was used more than arancione, but then now they switched roles, and arancio is used with half the frequency of arancione. And you can see that aranciato really isn't so used. Morphology is also a problem. These three sentences mean exactly the same. Ho perso il mio braccialetto arancione. I've lost my orange bracelet. They mean the exact same thing. But aranciato, again, has this ato at the end, which sounds like a past participle. It looks like color has gone through a process of painting. So when we represent, semiotically speaking, these symbols, we will notice that the thought is kind of uncertain. The referent is the same, but the symbol, of course, is different, but the thought seems to be slightly uncertain. For aranciato, it should be the same thought as arancione, but it is not, because people do not perceive it as arancione. Other endolinguistic issues, style and perception have a big influence on endolinguistic translation. Let's take these two words, dorato and aureo. They both mean golden. There is a word for aureo in English, which is aureate, but personally, I've only read it for particularly elaborated sentences, or an aureate sentence. But anyway, the etymology for both words is the same, from Latin aurum, which means gold. And yet aureo sounds more Latin. It sounds like aurum. So Italians generally perceive this aureo as something more sophisticated, something more formal sometimes, that reminds us of the classic ages. Let's take these two examples and let's talk about style and register. Let's say that we are children. We are children in kindergarten, and we want to, not only in kindergarten, but in elementary school, and we want to write a summary of a fairy tale. And in the fairy tale, there is this sentence: Il cavaliere estrasse la sua spada aurea. The knight took out his golden sword. Now let's try and be like children. We want to translate this and make it a bit less formal. Il cavaliere tirò fuori la sua spada dorata. It's the exact same sentence, but it worked. But some of you are not Italian, so some of you will not perceive the difference right now. But this actually sounds less formal. It sounds less elaborated, and it's good for a summary. Tiro fuori is a more informal version of estrasse, and dorata is a more informal version of aurea. But then let's try and make the opposite. Let's try and translate from low register, or anyway, mid-low register to high register. L'attore arrivò nella sua Lamborghini dorata. The actor arrived in his golden Lamborghini. So if we try and make this more formal, we would get some comical outcome. L'attore giunse is a more formal version of arrivò, giunse nella sua Lamborghini dorata, arrived in his golden aureate, maybe we might say, Lamborghini. This is somehow comical. It looks like, let's say, Leonardo DiCaprio is coming to Met Gala with on his fiery and aureate Lamborghini, as if Lamborghini were a horse. So this is quite comical. I would say that this is the ideal meaning of aureo for Italians. This is the thought. This is the set of ideas that sparks in the mind of an Italian speaker when I say aureo. So we have the golden ratio, la sezione aurea. We have jewelry and classical statues and mythology. So aureo sounds more formal and higher in register and classical somehow. Dorato, on the other side, well, it clearly refers more to the color. And we can also use the word dorato to refer to chicken. So when we say polletto dorato, it means browned chicken. You know, when you have, let's say, recipes and they say brown the chicken, in Italian you will find something like dovete dorare il pollo, cucinate, cook until, cuocete fino a che il pollo non diventa dorato, until the chicken becomes brown. But we say dorato generally. Although I've also heard golden chicken, but I'm afraid that might be a translation from another language. And now we move to interlinguistic translation. Well, etymology is a mess, okay? Etymology is a big problem. Sometimes it is not, because speakers do not perceive etymology as being, they don't perceive the words as still being linked to their etymology. But what if a speaker of a language, or many speakers of a certain language did? What if they perceived the word as still linked to its etymology? Let's try and make some examples. English red comes from Proto-Indo-European reud. Reud means blood. So, of course, men bleed, and men used to be sacrificed, and their blood was used as a pigment. And then we have Arabic, a Semitic language, and it's ahmar, and ahmar means red, and it comes from Proto-Semitic himar. Himar, still today in modern standard Arabic, it means donkey. So donkeys were also sacrificed, and their blood was used as a pigment. And then we have Hebrew. I don't think I even have to explain this. It's Adom, and Adom clearly comes from Adam, human. So humans bleed, and blood can be a pigment. And then we have Greek. We have kokinos. Of course, I'm referring to modern Greek, because ancient Greek still uses a word that is connected to Proto-Indo-European reud. But so in Greek, we have kokinos. And in Koine Greek, kokos was the name of a seed, and this seed was generally smashed to get a red pigment, and so again a pigment. But now we move to a very far away culture. We move to Japan, and in Japanese, red is kurenai, and in Old Japanese it was kurenawi, which is the contraction of three words, kure no awi. So awi means indigo, but in Old Japanese, indigo did not really mean only indigo, the color indigo, but also any kind of pigment. And kure was China, and no is genitive of kure in this case, or postposition, but you know how it is with agglutinative languages. We still try and use Greek grammatical categories, although they have completely different grammar. But anyway, let's say it's a genitive of kure, and so it literally means the indigo of China. So a pigment of China, because China used to export this this pigment, which was extracted from this plant that is below the donkey. So all of these languages link the idea of red, etymologically speaking, to the idea of a pigment, whether it's blood or a seed or a flower or whatever. But now let's take a look at Russian. We have krasny, and krasny comes from Proto-Slavic krasun, and krasun means beauty. So, of course, when Russian speakers speak, they do not perceive krasny as meaning beautiful, but they know that there is somehow a link between krasny and krasivoy, red and beautiful, and there are so many realia that are linked to the idea of beauty, but use the word krasny. For example, Krasnaya Ploshchad is the red square, but it actually meant beautiful square. Of course, people that did not go through higher education will not be able to understand that krasny meant beautiful formally. But what about those people that actually know, let's say philologists and professors and academics and even people of culture that don't necessarily need to be students or academics? Would they perceive krasny as still meaning beautiful in some words? If so, and we have a text about some ritual and sacrifice, and we try to translate into Russian, then we might have a problem, because something so bloodthirsty as a himar, the donkey that is sacrificed for the blood, doesn't really match the meaning of beauty that krasny has. Of course, such cultural differences are reflected onto idiomaticity. Let's take this example in English. It's always a red flag when your lover shows jealous behavior. This means that if your lover shows jealous behavior, it's a bad signal. It means that there is you might get into some dangerous situations. But now try and say red flag to a Russian. Of course, for Russians, the idea of a red flag is connected with the idea of communism. And a Russian speaker might reply to you, if you say that it's always a red flag when your lover shows jealous behavior, Ваша любовница, вероятно, Lenin. Your lover probably is Lenin. And then we have another problem, which is overlapping of, we have a problem of, I would say, overlapping of color. So, and of the symbols, the words for color. This example by Phillips, posted on Semantic Scholar, shows how generally in translation, English and Italian words for blue do not really match. The prototypical shade of blue for English speakers is this one, whereas the prototypical shade for blue for Italians is slightly darker. And also, you have probably noticed that English uses only one color, which is then adjectivized through adjectivization of nouns. We have powder blue, sky blue, light blue, royal blue, dark blue, navy blue, a whole range of possibilities. And then in Italian, we have three colors, which can also be adjectivized. We have azzurro, celeste, and blue. If somebody were to ask what color this color is to an English speaker, they would say it's powder blue, but anyway, it's still blue somehow. But if the same question, were proposed to an Italian, they would say that this is clearly celeste. They would not think of blue. So words actually shape our minds. I don't really agree with this chart entirely, because we also have names for darker shades of blue, blu notte, blu scuro, etc., etc. But I admit that it might be possible that this is a translation study, and so dark blue, royal blue, and navy blue were just translated as blue by in the analyzed corpus. Then we move on to intersemiotic translation, which is our very last topic. We will talk about color and words, color and smell and taste, color and music, and color and behavior. So before I start speaking about coloring words, we should keep in mind that contemporary art has focused a lot on the relationship between color and word. So semiotic analysis of works by artists can be really a tragedy for semiologists, especially if we analyze the art of the last century. I chose to show you some works by Barbara Gala, which is a Latvian French artist. She had an exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts in near Park Esplanade, if you live in Riga and you know Riga. And unfortunately, I tried and take some more pictures on one day, but I got to know at the very end that she took all of her paintings and brought them back to Paris, so I could not take some more photos. But anyway, this is what I could find on the internet. We have these two paintings, purple and violet. So as you can see, there is a metallic. It's a metallic painting. I would say it's a metal, and it has a specific color, and the word that represents that color is being matched with the color. As you can see, purple does not really show the prototypical, the ideal shade of purple. And I would say that many speakers would use purple also to refer to this color, which is, of course, also called violet. But what I see here is an attempt to distinguish between somehow the etymology of the two colors, because purple, of course, refers to the murex, which is a mollusk that used to be used to extract this pigment and sold all around the Mediterranean. And it was considered to be a sophisticated royal color. And then violet instead, of course, refers to the flower, the violet, which has kind of this shade. And yet these two colors easily overlap. As I have said, the analysis of these works is extremely complicated, and I tried and made an attempt to semiotically analyze this work, and it is extremely complicated. There is somehow a semiotic short circuit. The verbal symbol can stand for the word symbol itself, so for a word referent, and it can also stand for the color itself. But the color can stand, yes, of course, for the color, but it cannot stand for the word. But anyway, we can see that the artist tried to make a pretty good attempt. And now, what about audiovisual translation and ekphrasis? This is my photograph. I'm very proud of it. It's very well done. It's very well taken. This is a work by Gunda Garanzane, Latvian artist, and you can go now to St. Peter's Church and see and watch the exhibition. It's great. I would definitely advise it. This painting is called Kirviazets, pumpkin flower. And my question is, how many shades of yellow and of green and black do we need to translate this work for a blind person? What if we were trying to make an ekphrasis of this? It would probably be an endless ekphrasis. And of course, audiovisual translation was born just to make things simpler. It was born to just to help also blind people and to help and also deaf people when it comes to music, for example, or films, to understand art better. But if we want to make a complete exercise, we will actually continue like probably in an like for eternity. Now we move to color and smell or taste, and I've put these together because smell and taste are always linked together for neurological reasons. And well, smell and taste are linked because the nose and the mouth are very close, of course. And have you ever smelled a lipstick or a chopstick and thought, I might now that I'm in front of it, I might as well bite it because it's kind of inviting. Well, of course, makeup is also designed to attract multiple senses, and we can clearly see the same also for perfumes and food. Of course, your mouth and your nose are stimulated at the same time in many contexts. But of course, smell and taste are not culturally codified. They are not like words. They are not like images. So we talk about synesthesia mainly. So associations of different senses. This is a sentence that I said I would say a couple weeks ago. Sa proprio di arancione. I was drinking a spritz, and of course, if I say that something tastes like orange color, it means that probably it tastes like an orange. And then smells like yellow. It means that probably it smells like the scent of a lemon. And I've noticed that many ads try and exploit this. These synesthesias. For example, here we have this perfume, Goutal, which is portrayed with these lemons, and I think we also have lemongrass there. So actually, synesthesias are very, very useful if you want to promote your product. Now we move to color and music. I would love you to listen to this piece by Bert Appermont called Colors, and it represents a color. Would some of you try and guess what this color is? So I see we have some comments in chat. Okay, some people said purple. Oh, okay, I'm also looking at the comments on krasny, etc. Yeah, blue, faded dark blue. Okay, so Larissa, let me tell you that I said purple too. This was my first impression, but the other guys are right because this is actually blue. And as you can see, it's very personal. And when I showed this to Mrs. Pirida, if you know her, she told me this was probably something around green. This is actually very, very personal. And there's also another problem with, there's also another problem with the translation of color and music, which is the knowledge. Generally, academics, but common people in general, they don't have knowledge of music language. They are not able to read music, they cannot play instruments, and contemporary music can be very abstract. So unless a semiologist has gone through conservatory and studied interpretation of music will be very hard. Imagine if I were to ask you to interpret color through music. This is a great example, Color Wheel by Aaron J. Kernes. If you want, I've left the link, you can go and check it. And yes, it is pretty hard to interpret. Then we move to Aria by John Cage. This is one of the pieces that really changed contemporary music. The code is extremely vague. John Cage devised this as a piece that should be interpreted, not perfectly reproduced by an orchestra. The singer, and each different singer will give a different interpretation of this piece. I've left the link so you can screenshot it and go and check it. There are so many different interpretations, and of course, color has to be interpreted. But we are not sure that people will interpret red the same way as other people, and same for blue and purple and so forth. Then we have Scriabin, this Prometheus. Well, Scriabin is also one of the, he's like a colossus of contemporary music, and he tried to make this experiment. He assigned a color to each note, and during the performance there was a star in the middle of the hall that changed color depending on the main note. But the problem here is that this is not exactly scientific. There is no scientific correlation between the note and the color. Anyway, I've left the link also for this one. And now we have what Gianluigi Trovesi and Umberto Petrin have called synesthetic cells. I will have you listen to this piece and tell me what color does it make you think of, and not exactly only what color, what image. Let's say maybe you imagine the sea, maybe you imagine a forest or anything. Let's see if we have some comments on this. Any comments? Does this create a scene? I'm looking at the comments. Rain, gold digging, multicolor. Okay, I think this was for the other one. Oh no, it's for this one. Maybe. Yeah. Okay, very interesting. Well, long line and drop blue. Okay, very interesting. Actually, this piece is called Alba famigerata, meaning ill. We have another comment. Very specific image. Yes, Ernest. Anyway, this is called Alba famigerata, which can be translated as ill-famed dawn. And a dawn generally has a reddish color, but sometimes it can be white. So as you can see, this is synesthetic. There is overlapping between sensorial spheres, and it is also very personal. By the way, I really advise listening to this album. It's 21 tracks. It's great, and it has been made thinking of Alexander Scriabin. So you will notice many links with Scriabin. So next one. Oh, I'm sorry. So as I have promised, I will not be talking about human translation only, but also about animal translation, because animals are the best translators in the world. They are even better than us. So color can be translated into behavior. Let's take the example of poison dart frogs. They are bluish and yellowish. Color is clearly an index. So it's a type of sign that is naturally motivated, but it is not intentional. Mother Nature devised these creatures to tell the world, I am not tasty, I am poisonous. There is a difference between poisonous and venomous. Poisonous means that you get the poison if you eat the animal. Venomous means that the animal injects the poison when it's hunting. Venomous animals, the ones that hunt, actually avoid communication. They avoid the possibility of their color being translated instinctively, of course, by the other animal. So we have vipers, for example. They are masters of camouflage. But there are some exceptions to this. We have blue-ringed octopi, which is a kind of octopus that is mainly found in Australia and in Japan, and they are masters of camouflage. Also, they can easily hide themselves in rocks or whatever, in corals. But when they feel threatened, they start showing blue rings. And also these mean, I'm not tasty. It is very interesting that they seem to show awareness of this ability that they have. Is it possible that this is not an index anymore? Is this intentional? Is this a signal? Is it still motivated naturally, but intentional? If so, we might be finding some refined consciousness in animals, and that is very interesting. Unfortunately, these, animals, as I've told you, are very good at translating, and humans are not. So many humans die because of these little octopuses, because they think they're so cute and tiny, and they touch them, and there is no antidote to the venom. So animals can understand this, but we cannot. And then we have, well, of course, color is not used only to hunt, but also to mate, to have a little love time and babies. Peacock spiders, for example, use their abdomen, and which is very colorful, and wiggle their arms as if their paws, as if they were trying to say, "Hi, look at me, female specimen. I'm here, and let's mate." And the brighter the color, the higher the probability, the chance that these spiders will mate. I've left a link. There's a very, very nice music and videos of dancing spiders. It's very interesting. And of course, flowers. It is not only an animal thing, it is also a vegetable thing. Generally purple flowers like lavender attract insects and hummingbirds, and this of course is very important for pollen and reproduction of plants. So color again is translated into behavior. So these are conclusions. There is not even one full stop, because as I have promised, I'm not willing to give you answers. I'm willing to give you tools for your future translations. So when you translate, please try and think of these questions before you write your translation. Is color perceived the same by everyone? What are the main associations to a certain color? Do languages codify color in the same way? Are there stylistic differences? Are there frequency differences in the use of a word? Does grammar reflect the meaning of the word? Does culture influence the perception of color? Is the etymon still felt as a part of the word? Are synonyms actually synonyms? How do different systems of representation interact? How vague is the code? And of course, what in the world is color? And most of all, if you can translate from French to Arabic, why can't you translate from octopus to human? Thank you very much. If there are any ideas or questions, I'm welcome to hear from you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Any comments or questions? in addition to those asked at the end of the presentation? Yes?
If I could, I don't necessarily have a question, but a friend of mine has medical synesthesia. She has a strong association of color and sound with emotion and certain sensations. And it's kind of refreshing to see these things talked about in a more social sense. Because some things, some associations that she has are somewhat more obvious, like blue is cool, pink is relaxed, etc. And presumably this is because some of it is socially codified and some of it is what the mind comes up with personally. And while I do not have any particular questions or comments on the linguistic side of things, I appreciate the subject of synesthesia being brought up and being talked about in a way that actually includes both social and also some sense evolutionary interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you. That's much appreciated. Yes, actually, it is true that, as I've already said, there is a vagueness of the code. But somehow music has been, at least in the Western society, codified culturally speaking and socially speaking. And probably we could extend this research to other macro cultures. And if we were to play that music to, I don't know, in the Middle East or maybe in Japan or South Africa, probably we will get different outcomes. We will get different perceptions of synesthetic perceptions and cultural associations. So yes, and I think this should be talked about, and there should be some more research on it, because I would say that our contemporary research has been focusing so much on verbal translation, and intersemiotic translation has been tackled, but not to the same extent. So yeah. Okay, do we have any more questions? Otherwise, I would leave the floor to my colleague, Giorgia Cambiano.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, and as you said correctly, the floor is given to your colleague, Giorgia Cambiano. She is going to talk about taste and culture in translation to Italian cuisine.
Excuse me, before Giorgia starts, just 1 second. I was just told by a comment that actually, when I talked about red flag is actually a calque, and it was already widely used in Russian. So it's very interesting because we probably see English as an hegemonic language, and it somehow influences other cultures, but I did not know about the opposite. I did not know that it was a calque from Russian. So thank you very much, Yauchoka, I think I pronounced it well. I hope so. Thank you for your comment.
Yes, thank you. Don't see Giorgia. Oh, yeah, here you are.
You can
floor is
see
yours. Me? Yes, we can see and hear you.
Thank you. I will try to share my screen. Just a sec. Okay. So good afternoon to everybody. My name is Giorgia Cambiano, and I am a master's translation and conference interpreting at the University of Trieste in Italy, and I am a visiting Erasmus student at the University of Latvia. studying at the Department of English Studies as well as at the Department of Russian Studies. Today, I will talking about food and translation with regard to my home country, Italy. And my presentation is entitled The Tastes and Culture in Translation, the Italian Cuisine.
I'm sorry, Georgia, are we supposed to see your presentation?
Don't you see my screen?
Because I don't see, I don't know if other participants can see.
I will try to do you see it all right now?
Yes, yes, it works now, thank you.
Perfect, maybe some technical issues. Okay, I will start with the outline of the contents that will be tackled during my presentation. I will start with an introduction on culture and identity. Then I will give an outline of Italian food and its realia. Then we will move on with the research I conducted, that is the analysis of Italian menus and their English translations. Italian menus will be analyzed from 5 different perspectives that are language and style, rhetorical techniques, morphological processes, realia, and space identity. And then we will end with the conclusion. So, to start with a brief theoretical background and some definition. Culture has been defined for the first time in history by the anthropologist Edward Taylor in 1871. That defined it as the complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a members of society. While identity, on the other hand, has been defined as people's concept of who they are, of what sort of people they are, and how they relate to others, as well as the way individuals and groups define themselves and are defined by others on the basis of ethnicity, religion, language, and culture. So, how food is related to culture and identity? If we think about that complex whole defined by Edward Taylor, we can definitely include food as part of it. We may think about all the cultural perception of food and eating, the underlying tradition, the cultural meanings and implication represented in a single dish, the tendency to prefer some flavors and tastes instead of others, or else the role that food plays in a society, the way cultures talk about food. These are all expressions of cultural identity. And thinking about Italy, well, Italy is known all over the world as the home of good food. And in fact, we have a centenary tradition of recipes and dishes that do not only vary from region to region, but also from town to town. And all the cultural meanings and the cultural perception as well are directly accessible and perceived by people belonging to that particular cultural background. But from the other end, we also notice that many Italian dishes such as pizza and pasta are so popular nowadays that they become widely consumed and prepared on a daily basis, even kilometers far away from Italy. And sometimes I have this feeling that it seems that people, when are eating or producing or consuming dishes such as pizza and pasta, do not even have the impression of eating something that is culturally represented, that has a specific geographical and cultural background, that is Italy. And to better explain this relationship between food, culture, history, and identity, that is represented in dishes, even behind the most obvious and famous, I would like to tell you a bit more about the history behind one of the most famous Italian dishes, pizza margherita. Pizza margherita is the simplest pizza and the one that Italian people like the most. The one topped with mozzarella cheese, basil, and tomato sauce. This pizza was named after the Queen Margherita di Savoia, who reigned in Italy from the late 19th century to the early 20th century. And when she visited Naples with her husband, the king, they went to the most famous pizzeria of that time. Also, Naples is considered the city in which pizza was born. And the sovereign were offered the 3 types of pizzas with different toppings. The queen fell madly in love with the one topped with mozzarella cheese, basil, and tomato sauce because, according to her, it reminded her of the color of the Italian flag. That is, in fact, green, white, and red. And the pizza maker was so proud of that he decided to name this kind of pizza after the queen. So that's why still today this pizza carries the name Pizza Margherita. Okay, after this brief introduction, I will tell you more about the research I conducted. That is the analysis of Italian menus and their translation into English. I consulted a large number of Italian restaurant websites, and looking through their menus, I identified some distinguishing features that they all have in common. And then I looked for their English translation when it was available, and I tried to see if these distinguishing features of Italian menus were or were not maintained in the translation into the target language. Then I sampled 11 websites whose menus provided inter and translation examples and the translation outcomes that will be analyzed during this presentation. So why English? English because nowadays is considered as a lingua franca, that is a vehicular language used among the speakers of different first languages for whom English is the communicative medium of choice and the only option. And it is clear that English was the language chosen by Italian websites to make their menus accessible to a wider audience of potential customers that probably would not, of course, they would not speak Italian. Maybe their mother tongue is not English either, but of course they will have at least a minimal knowledge of English that will allow them to get familiar with the menus. And English, it's also, in most of the cases, the only language in which Italian menus were translated into. Then it is also interesting the fact that many Italian words concerning food, such as the already mentioned pasta and pizza, have entered the English language as borrowing and loan words. Okay, so as I already mentioned in the table of contents, the first parameter of analysis is language and style. Looking through the Italian menus, I realized that the language of menus is usually complex, pompous. It has an evocative lexicon full of rhetorical embellishments. And the reason behind that is quite obvious, because the refinement, the flourish style of the name of the dish stands for the deliciousness of the dish itself. So that using this flourish language, the menus tries to arouse this positive feeling in the customer who read it, and also it tries to evoke this the feeling, the taste is behind the dish itself. I inserted some prime examples of that that represent the fact that many times Italian dishes are enriched with some expressions that do not add any specific information about the dish itself, but tries to convey this sense of tasteness, this taste of positive feelings, etc. So as you can see from the restaurant Casa Perbellini, among its starters, it proposes wafer al sesamo, tartare di branzino caprino all'erba cipollina e sensazione di liquirizia. That was translated as sesame wafer, sea bass tartare, chilled goat cheese with a hint of licorice. So we can see that this with a hint of do not add any specific information, but it's useful to recreate this flourish style in the name of the dish itself. Then we have from restaurant Caino, pici con essenza di una matriciana diversa e guanciale croccante. That was translated as pici with a very unique amatriciana sauce. It is interesting to note that the literal translation would be pici with the essence of a different amatriciana sauce and crispy pork jaw. So we can see that the translator still tried to convey the same flourish style, the same pompous language in the English translation with this very unique, but still some parts are missing, like with the essence of. Then rhetorical techniques. Looking through the Italian websites, in lots of instances, I see that there is the influence of other semantic spheres when talking about food. The meal, or as eating at the restaurant, is addressed on website as an experience, a journey through flavors, gustatory memories. Then they talk about a collision of ideas. And I added an example from the restaurant Piazza Duomo. They proposed un percorso di 6 calici abbinati al tartufo bianco d'alba. That was translated as a path of 6 glasses paired with the white truffle of alba. And here we can see this reference to the journey, to this path of 6 glasses of wine. Among the other rhetorical techniques that are employed in menus, we have the personification of dishes that is achieved through capital letters when the Italian language would not need them, and also the exceeding usage of articles put in front of nouns, but also this abundance of articles that still convey this sense of redundancy. They try to recreate this complex language. This is a prime example from the restaurant Il Luogo di Aimo e Nadia. They have il piccione di miroglio, il consommé con il filetto e il tramezzino di fegatini, il petto laccato alle spezie, la coscia farcita al tartufo bianco. Not only I highlighted all the articles that are inserted in this dish entries, but also I tried to put some emphasis when reading it so that an Italian speaker, but also I would say a non-Italian speaker, when listening to it, will soon realize this quite redundant, this usage of articles. It is still quite unpleasant to read. It was translated as the pigeon, producer Miroglio, the consommé with fillet and sandwich of its liver, breast glazed with spices, filled leg with white truffle. So we have the personification of the pigeon, and looking at it, it seems that it's not even something you will eat, but it's something alive, perhaps. And also, of course, the English language does not require as many articles as the Italian one. Still, we have a few of them in the English translation that recreate this sense of redundancy and complexity. Moving on, we have the third parameter of analysis, that is morphological processes. The Italian language allows the alteration of words. So through suffixes that are added at the end of the base form of a noun, you can slightly modify the meaning of the noun itself. An example of that are the diminutives, so that if you add a specific suffix to the base form of noun, you can modify its meaning, recreating a sense of smallness, intimacy, affection. We will see it thanks to these 2 examples. So we have from Villa Crespi restaurant, zuppetta di fegato grasso, latte di bufala e lampone. Zuppetta is the diminutive of the noun zuppa, that is the soup in English, but Italian speaker will feel it as smallish, maybe more tasty, cute. So the meaning is slightly modified. But of course, in English, we don't have this suffixation process, this morphological process. And it was simply translated as foie gras soup, buffalo milk, and raspberry. Then we had another instance from the restaurant Agli Amici, that among their desserts, they have tortina calda con il gelato alla crema. Here again, tortina is the diminutive of torta, that is cake. But for an Italian speaker, tortina will be immediately perceived as a smallish cake with a melted heart. Again, in English, we cannot translate it keeping this morphological process, and also an explanation of it is needed to make it accessible to non-Italian speakers. So the translator decided to translate it as apple cake with ice cream. So explaining which kind of cake it is, but still this reference to its smallish size is missing. Then realia. Here again, I would say that the Italian cuisine is food of realia. We may think that, well, defining realia as these cultural objects, aspects, meanings that are valid only into a specific culture and do not exist outside of it, we can definitely say that the Italian cuisine is food of realia. And when dealing with realia, the translator may opt for 3 main strategies that are keeping the realia as it is in the source language, adapting the realia to the target language, or else deleting the cultural reference. I decided to propose this prime example of realia. The restaurant Villa Crespi proposes tonno vitellato. Tonno vitellato, I would say that is a realia from my region, that is Piedmont, because for Piedmontese Italian speaker, tonno vitellato will be immediately recognized as an innovative reinterpretation of an already existing dish that is called vitello tonnato. And it will also feel that the name of the dish, tonno vitellato, is a wordplay that reverses the original structure of the other dish. So that from vitello tonnato, here we have tonno vitellato. When it comes to translating this realia, it would be quite difficult because tonno vitellato would not mean anything for a non-Italian speaker, maybe even for someone who is not coming from Piedmont. So the translator decided to keep actually the name of the realia, tonno vitellato, but an explanation of it was needed. So raw tuna with sliced veal and dashi broth. But still, we can see that this reference to the already existing dish and this word play of the name of dish cannot be perceived by outsiders. Then an evergreen realia, pasta. As I've already said, many Italian words have entered the English vocabulary, such as pasta. Pasta is not even translated most of the times. But pasta is a very broad concept because in Italy we have so many different kinds of pasta that differ not only from region to region, but from city to city, and that are related to specific recipes that have very specific cultural meaning. And I decided to put this example from Osteria Francescana, tortellini del dito mignolo in brodo di cappone. So tortellini is a specific kind of pasta, the one you can see in the picture, that is typical from the city of Modena. It is located in the region Emilia-Romagna, so more or less center of Italy. Even though the literal translation of this dish would be tortellini of the pinky finger served in capon broth, it was translated as Modenese miniature tortellini served in capon broth. So we can definitely notice that this reference to the pinky finger is missing. But I would say that this reference is quite interesting because it refers to the way this kind of pasta is produced. Because basically, when you want to recreate its distinguishing shape, you finally have to twist the slice of dough of pasta on your pinky finger so that it acquires this small and distinguishing shape and size. The translator still decided not to mention the pinky finger, but it decided to mention the smallish size of the tortellini, so miniature tortellini, and then he decided to add the reference to the city in which it is usually produced. Then we have our fifth and last parameter of analysis, that is space identity. Well, I would say that spaces are indeed an important mark of identity. So that identity was also defined as a potpourri of memories, conceptions, interpretations, ideas, and related feelings about specific physical settings, as well as types of settings. This statement is perfectly represented by the example you can find here, that is cipolla cotta al forno con salsiccia di bra, amaretti e fonduta, by the restaurant La Ciao del Tornavento. Here, the realia, it's salsiccia di Bra. That is, again, another food typical from my region, Piedmont. Salsiccia di Bra is a kind of sausage that is produced with veal instead of pork, and it is usually eaten raw, and it is typical from the city of Bra, that is, as I said, located in Piedmont. The story behind it is, I would say, unique, because its origins are related to the presence of a large community of Jewish people that populated the area, that because of their religion, they could not eat pork, so that the local butchers decided to start producing sausages using veal instead of pork. But a royal concession issued by King Carlo Alberto, who reigned at that time back in early 19th century, prohibited every production of sausage using alternative meat to pork. But the butchers of Bran were the only one exempted from this prohibition, and so that they could continue producing veal sausages. And another popular theory tells that, in fact, the king really enjoyed this veal sausage, so he wanted to ensure a steady supply to the royal kitchen, and that's why he decided not to prohibit this veal production. And so we can see that behind the name of this dish, we have also not only cultural perception, but also local folklore, ancient tradition, even religious connotation. But of course, these references would not be accessible to people who do not belong to that specific cultural background. The English translation of this dish is baked onion stuffed with veal sausage, amaretti biscuit, and cheese fondue. So we can see that a lot is missing, but at least we have the reference of which kind of meat this sausage is offering, veal instead of pork. To conclude, we can argue that food definitely have an intrinsic emotional value, but also a symbolic value, indicating social or religious belonging, as we saw from the previous examples. Food is related to personal impressions, individual memories, and experiences. And if we think about Italian menus, we can notice that the menus are also characterized by a specific language that is usually complex and flourish. And with my research and the analysis of Italian dishes and their translation, I tried to highlight that many times there is much more behind the name of a single dish. The cultural references that it evokes are immediately recognized by Italian people, Italian speakers, of course, but to be more precise, from those people belonging to that specific cultural background in which the specific dish is produced. And all these features may be very difficult to translate properly, and translation outcomes were very different. Sometimes they fail to recreate the same, to convey the same meanings into the target language. Sometimes to compensate for this loss, they adopt different techniques, such as adding further information or provide an explanation. But as a result, we can always say that translation results as a compromise between what must be kept, what can be omitted, and what should be paraphrased in order to convey more or less the same meaning into a target language. These are the references to the papers and journals I consulted for my research, and here are the website of the Italian restaurant that helped me a lot with my research. I would like to say thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask me.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Are there any questions? Don't see any in the chat, just a comment that it was a
Yes, I might have one.
Yes, go ahead.
So, okay. Thank you, Georgia, for your presentation. It was very, very interesting. And I will not thank you for putting all of that food because you made me so hungry now. I would really, I would really love to eat something. But yeah, actually, I noticed that you said that about the pidgin translation, and that English does not need so many articles, but I don't you think that, and I think that maybe also you have this perception, as we both are Italian, I think, don't you have this perception that also the Italian version is not really, doesn't really work with the articles? I mean, I've never seen them on a menu.
Thank you, Gianluca, for your comment. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I would say that the Italian language in that specific instance does not even require that such a number of articles. But of course, I would say that in that specific instance, they were used to recreate this sense of complexity, this sense of refinement of the dish itself, so that it looks more complex, the dish, but also quite unpleasant to hear. So yeah, definitely, I would not say that Italian language required so many articles as well.
Yeah. I agree too. It was a bit redundant, I would say. Okay, thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? No, thank you once again for this very interesting and very colorful presentation. Now we will move to our next presentation by Ernest Stroinovs, the role of formality change in translating fiction.
All right, give me just a moment. See if I can set up the... So I hope you can see and hear me.
Yes, that's fine.
My current audio setup is something of a mess. So, hello, my name is Ernest, and I will be speaking about a subject that is somewhat vague, somewhat nebulous, but that is kind of important for translators considering the subject. Have you lost me? Can you still hear me?
We can hear you. Your presentation just got smaller, but it's okay. Can you hear us?
Wait.
No.
Wait, can you hear me now?
Yes, we could hear you before as well.
Okay, for some reason it told me that my microphone just cut out. All right. Apologies for that. So there is a lot that goes into translation, and specifically a good translation. But the problem is that not many people can confidently tell what it is, and I don't think most of them would be correct, because translation, as of right now, is something of an undefined subject. There is no one universally accepted definition of what it is that translation does. We can talk about the seemingly obvious principle of there being a text, be it a book, a movie script, a poem, a scientific paper, something happening to, and it coming out on the other side in a different language. But what exactly that middle process is, most definitions skirt around, because there is no one clear, good way to explain translation. And unless so, what would make a translation quality? We can talk about whether it is accurate to the meaning of the original text. But that is subjective, and in the case of fiction, sometimes it just might not be really truly possible to be 100% accurate. Clarity is another one you hear a lot. Again, that's nebulous. That's not even necessarily correlated to the source text. And also authenticity, which is kind of different from accuracy. With this, I mean some authenticity to style, to norms of the source text. And again, that is hard to really explain. It's not necessarily unrelated to the translation process as such. It's just the quality of the finalized target text. Quality herein is completely subjective. It is at the discretion of the translator and the reader. And sure, quality and sort of accuracy of translation in a wider sense, even though, again, accuracy is a nebulous subject, they are linked, but they are not necessarily synonymous. There are a lot of examples of translations that go, so to speak, off the rails from the original text, but are still appreciated. One of the original Soviet translations of Alice in Wonderland, I believe, had a whole lot of common words and nouns and names changed, and is still liked as a beloved piece of fiction. Some of the younger viewers might be familiar with the somewhat controversial dub of the children's show Ghost Stories, which, due to a copyright mix-up, launched originally in Japan as a low-budget children's show, which never took off and was exported overseas to make the studio back a profit on the money that's put into it. But due to the mix-up, the translator and the voice actors had free reign over character lines. So they changed the entire genre of the story from a sort of delightful children's novel into a really sort of seedy adult comedy, and became infamous on the early years of the internet for that. So there is this sort of gap which is filled with subjectivity. The gap between what we think of as a good translation, what we think of as a good text, and somewhere out there what the original used to be. And to bridge that gap, there's the concept of translation strategies, which some of the previous presenters spoke about, was conceived. The problem with that is that translation strategies are once again a really subjective thing. There is no clear-cut definition. Wolfgang Glosche calls them a potentially conscious procedure for the solution of a problem, which can frankly mean anything. So it is unsurprising that the number of possible translation strategies and the definitions thereof vary greatly between different theorists and different schools of thought. When we were taught that in university, I think we were taught about a dozen possible translation strategies, some of which were somewhat interchangeable or splittable into smaller chunks. On the internet, you can find information about 5 or 7 or any number of such things, because a translation strategy can mean a lot of things. As I said, it means sort of general approach to translation, the sort of how the most basic some machine parts are common to all translations are done. This could be some of a technique to ensure this and that part or characteristic of the source text translates into the target text. And what is the most subjective and frankly probably the most overlooked, in my opinion, idea of translation theories is as tools that the translator uses. Either there is some disparity between languages that does not allow for some senses to transition smoothly, or sometimes the translator just feels that that doesn't feel right. I can improve that. Because of this or that characteristic of the source text, or also because of some sort of personal opinion they might have, which, yes, ideally would be carried as far away as possible from the process of translation. But when speaking about something like fiction, which is very emotionally involved with the reader, it sometimes is hard to impossible to keep that subjectivity away from the work, because in some sense the work exists to invoke subjective feelings. And speaking of this, why does a translation need changes? As I said, there's a lack of some equivalent, or there is a difference in purely how language functions through its mechanics, or there's just some mismatch in flow, in sense of style, which, for example, in one language, you might, let's say, invoke the description of a scene starting with a noun, but in another, it just sounds better when you start with an adjective. And this is a recent example that I myself found of an internet fan translation of the novel in Estonian, A Sacred and Terrible Air, whose original name I will not try to pronounce, by Mr. Robert Kurwitz. Originally, the English translation of the novel was supposed to come out in 2019 or 2020, alongside the video game sort of quasi-adaptation of it. However, with some budgetary issues, and then later with COVID-19, to this day, we do not really have a published English translation. So some fan took it upon themselves anonymously to start the translation process for at least a few of the chapters. And here we can see, and then one Tuesday morning, when in the blue sky there are white clouds, go 4 sisters together to the beach for a swim. And in Latvian, this would be a fairly innocuous sentence structure, so I assume that will be the same way in Estonian. However, in English, which is not quite maybe as strict with its clause structure, but which is an analytic language which has a certain way of structuring its clauses, it just feels wrong. The sentence does not necessarily not make sense, but the flow of the clauses is either incorrect or just somewhat strange and could be improved. Certainly from the windows does not spill into the golden room, not light but gray, as the sort of double negative, which I am not sure if it was in the source text or not. But again, this, not taking that mistake into account, this sentence structure, while it could potentially happen in English, it does not fit the context within which it is used in the novel, and it does not fit quite with the choice of wording and choice of phrasing of the author and of the translator. So while probably if we just look at the level of parts of sentences like noun, verb, noun, etc., just how they go in their order and translate every single one directly. This is probably how the sentence looks in Estonian. It does not transfer to the English very well at all, which is why so much of the process is at the discretion of the translator. And every translator has to be, to some or other degree or extent, at least a bit of an editor for themselves and for their final text to pick out such parts. On to the main topic. What is, how does register play into it, and formality? What does the translation strategy of register, formality, change do, and how we define it? And here, once again, you will be very disappointed to learn that this thing is also very subjective. Katie Wells has got formality, and the way in which the style or tone of the language will vary in appropriateness according to the social context. And while it is a fair enough definition of how formality works, it tells us very little about what exactly it is, because again, formality is a different thing for different languages. In Latvian, involves using specialized or simplified vocabulary, while in English it might actually complicate the vocabulary further. And there are different ways that sentences, clauses, and meaning is structured in different languages, and in different languages the sort of rules that have been prescribed for the idea of formality work differently. They do something else in different languages, and something that is formal or semi-formal in one language and sounds fine might not carry across as well at the same level of formality in the target text. One of the mistake I'm committing here is, of course, I'm talking about formality as if there is such a thing really as semi-formal. Well, semi-formal is kind of extremely nebulous. It is either nothing or it is everything, because formality exists not in chunks of informal, that stops. There's where semi-formal starts, semi-formal stops there, and formal starts from that point onward. Now, it is a gradient, and where something is on that, and how we describe it as formal or semi-formal is, and you will be tired of this word by the end of this presentation, subjective. The register is a certain level of formality, but the boundary between those levels is so blurred that it, in some cases, might as well not exist, especially in the case of fiction, where we just cannot speak about an entire novel. At least we very, very rarely can speak something like entire novel which features different characters, different scenes, different perspectives, in one sense of formality. And also, even if we do, it might be quote unquote tainted by this or that aspect of a different register. And for our purposes, formality change, let's here define very simply as a segment of the target text is brought to a different level of formality. It may be a tiny bit more complex than that, because formality is no one thing. It's in every language a rule set, not a rule. And again, especially in fiction, we might in the same novel have a scene of a president giving a formal speech, and 5 pages later we have a drunk man swearing at a fire hydrant in a very crass tone. And these both things exist within the boundaries of the same narrative. We give them different interpretations in their formality, but they kind of contribute to the same text, to the same set of tones, more so than a singular tone in of itself. And in that way, we can think of fiction as sort of informal by default, which is not really correct, because you can, and I'm sure someone already has written an entire novel purely in sort of scientific language. And of course, as time goes on and what was a norm for writing style slowly becomes antiquated and formalized, a lot of books from the 19th and early 20th century, for example, are much more formal to us today than they were to the people writing and reading them back in their heyday. So while it's not really correct to think of fiction as informal, as a blanket statement, it helps as a way of thinking of understanding that there very, very rarely is one definable point of formality and informality, especially when we come to the realm of imaginary events that can occur with any number of events, characteristics, situations, etc. And the register may shift drastically from scene to scene, as with the example I gave previously, president in one scene, a drunk in another, within the confines of the same work. And although I'm sure most of you know this, but this is a strangely common mistake for beginning authors, that register really applies to more than just prose. It also exists in monologue and dialogue and prologue, etc. And in these situations too, we can speak of this or that register or this or that level of formality. And why, for example, would we change formality? This one example I have is from a class assignment we had, I think about a year ago by now, where we were given a fragment of Mara Cielena's literally rich literary, fairy tale, short story, rūguma un skābuma ķernes pārvērtība. And in class discussion, we decided that their names would be translated because, you know, they're something of a neologism, and the original two as Mrs. Sourchurn and I believe Mr. Grobbeepot, which amuses me to this day to no end. And well, the Latvian readers can pick out that the original text, some of it is somewhat lowbrow, for the lack of a better word. There's a lot of more informal statements, and it has a few bits of cultural realia, although not quite here in the this second here, although you can think of the character names as having cultural realia, because Chern. And that was actually somewhat hard to recreate consistently. So me and my partner for the task, we could not really make a sort of lowbrow, sort of low formality text work with the idea of the main characters being called Mr. and Mrs. So what we chose to do is just run with it as far and as much as we could. And because there were some semi more formal bits in the source text, it actually turned out quite amusing, and we could both amplify the fairy tale aspect of the tale, and also we could talk more so about the we more so showcase the humor of you know, the two characters being defined exclusively by being grumpy, by putting all this not quite flowery but definitely some more formal feeling text than there was in the original. And of course, this is not a professional translation, that's one thing, and is not the be-all end-all of translation is another thing. We did do this based off of our subjective feelings, because the text we had previously, our subjective feelings told us was clunky and did not quite work, while the sort of formalized version had a much better flow to it and conveyed a lot of the same ideas and same elements of the short story, while also having a distinguishable style and mood of its own, while because well, the original sort of shifts back and forth between formality and informality. You can kind of see already on the left side between the dialogue and the other parts. It is much harder to do that in English. The English language does not modulate as easily between formal and informal. So we decided to sort of go with that and have a consistent, enjoyable tone instead of maybe being somewhat tonally more akin to this or that part of the story that maybe the author didn't even intend for us to, and for the readers to think about that much. No reason be to convey ideas, concepts, and sort of, again, which would be the transfer ideas of the same information, just in a different way. I've had a lot of medium level gripes with the translation of the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. The following is a excerpt from the Tower of Swallows, and the scene is intended to be a serious discussion by a group of criminals. They are in the story. They are possibly risking their lives. There is a lot of some discord between them. And while the subject matter they are talking about is more serious and can lend itself to slightly more formal choice of phrase or vocabulary, which I understand from a Polish friend of mine is the case in the original novel in the scene. However, I do not speak Polish and I do not have the original at hand right now, so take that statement with a big old grain of salt. The choice of phrasing here is what one would describe as odd. We have one thing I know for certain: basing any hopes of Nilfgaardian benevolence on that balderdash would be even greater balderdash. And that is some great load of false hogwash and balderdash. And I can imagine why the translator could choose this or that level of vocabulary to be applied. Maybe there was something of an informalized word in a formal context that did not quite, it was not quite a swear word, but was something more lowbrow, so to speak. But the use of a very antiquated word, balderdash, really takes the scene out of the sort of suspension of disbelief, because very few people speaking English actually use the word balderdash at that sort of rate. I believe within 2 pages, the word balderdash was used 4 or 5 times. And in addition to the rest of the formalization, the vocabulary the dialogue gets, and just also a lot of the structure to it, becomes convoluted, it becomes hard to follow, and instead, I would have honestly preferred the scene, in my opinion, would be easier to follow and understand and have less occasions of really antiquated words which just seem humorous at some point. If they just took a more sort of modern slang or similar words, or if they just used a swear word. The idea thereof is not inconceivable for a group of criminals, and there are other instances of swearing in the novel and in the series in general. It'll be a much more believable and easier to take seriously point from the standpoint of what people who talk about literature refer to as the suspension of disbelief. The idea that you have to sort of suspend your realistic thinking to some or other degree when you are reading fiction, because of course the events are not real. And some part of it is on the author and will translate it to make the text not necessarily realistic, but believable as a piece of dialogue said by someone or as a thought in the character's mind. And the word balderdash 5 times in 2 pages just does not lend itself to that. And cutting this somewhat short, originally wasn't meant to be at the very end of the list of presentations, so I cut out a bit of my script, and I know I've been moved a bit up again, so that is not an issue. But as I have yammered on a lot already, many parts of the translation process are subjective, especially in terms of fiction. A lot of how the scene is read and how the scene is understood takes precedent over the grammatical, linguistic, etc. rules, even though, of course, they also need to be followed, unless the author's intent is otherwise. But a lot of that is at the discretion of the translator to make a text that is both quality and a quality transfer of the original into a new language. What exactly constitutes a translation issue from this standpoint is also subjective, because, as I said, what if the author has made some spelling mistake or something like that deliberately? Or, for example, the character CMS spelled sign within the context or something. I remember reading Stephen King when I was at a much way too young age to read Stephen King, and I was very confused by a series of translators' notes pertaining to the correction and uncorrection and recorrection again of, I believe, in the library policeman, there being in Universe Street that is officially named Angel Street, but the plaque is misspelled, so it says Angle Street. And for some reason, that got a lot of translators' notes instead of just one of the first occurrence.
Excuse me, I need to ask if you will be able to wrap up.
Oh yeah, I am wrapping up right now, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So formality levels vary, they're hard to define. Formality change helps eliminate what would be perceived as issues by this vagueness, by the ways formality is handled. In fiction, formality change need not refer to a sort of a large leap between very lowbrow and highbrow language. It can be just a different way of phrasing the same thing, and several different smaller changes that can be viewed as a general shift of register over a long span of time. And as I have already ran out of time, that will be it from me. Thank you very much. I guess I can take quick questions if the speakers after me do not mind.
And in case there are any questions, because your presentation was quite thorough and contained a lot of information, but maybe someone has a question or a comment. No. Okay, thank you. Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you so much. And now the floor is given to our last presenter today, Luisa Karlivane.
Yes. Just a second.
Are we supposed to see or hear anything?
Yes, just a second. There's
okay.
technical problem, but I will deal with it in a second.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I will rejoin in a second.
Okay.
Okay, so oh. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so hello dear audience. My name is Luisa Karlovana and I am a fourth year student of the English Philology program at the University of Latvia. The topic of my presentation today is the challenges of translating for cinema and TV when things go south. I wanted to present the findings of an ongoing study about what are the challenges translators face when they translate voiceover texts and subtitles that are to be used in cinemas and television. And the challenges that I will discuss are based on peculiar mistranslation examples that I have personally noticed in television and cinema. And when I happened to come across a peculiar example of translation, I also tried to figure out how did it come to this, as in what might have caused this particular misunderstanding, or what was the trail of thought the translator had, or as you will see in some cases, the lack of it. To continue with the overview, I will state the aim of this presentation, followed by different types of mistranslation, and I will conclude with a few comments about translators' competence. So the aim of this presentation is to inform the audience about the challenges that translators face when translating for cinema and TV based on evidence of mistranslation. And I will start with the first type of mistranslation, that would be gender switch in the target text when orthographic transcription is used to adapt personal names for the target text. And according to Cabinet Regulation number 114, when orthographically transcribing English personal names, a declinable ending shall be added thereto, which indicates the gender of the person. And for male personal names, the declinable ending S is added, and for female personal names, the declinable ending A or E. And my example of mistranslation comes from the movie The First Monday in May that was shown at the Baltic Pearl Film Festival. And the name of the musician Solange Knowles was translated in the subtitles as Solange Knowles instead of Solange Knowles. So clearly there was a switch of gender in the target text. And the second example is a case when a male personal name was turned into a female personal name. This example comes from the movie Godzilla. In the scene, a man introduces himself as Kyle Terrington. In Latvian subtitles, this personal name was translated as Kylie Terrington instead of Kyle Terrington. And I also tried to figure out what might have been the reason behind these mistakes. And my guess is that the translators were translating the subtitle file without having the video material of the exact scene open next to it. And the next type of mistranslation would be literal translation. The two main problems are that word-for-word translation is used for translating from the source language into the target language, and collocations get split up and translated as separate words. My first example comes from the scientific series How Did I Do It, shown on the Discovery Channel. The episode was about how some process was done in a factory and a boring machine was also used. And in the subtitles, the collocation boring machine was translated into Latvian as garlaicīgā mašīna instead of urbi mašīna. So this would be a case of literal translation. And the second example comes from the crime series Agatha Christie's Poirot, shown in LTV1. In the scene, Poirot is walking down the street when he meets an old friend who has a dog with him, and the friend introduces the dog with the phrase, "This is Sprat." This was translated into Latvian as "Šis ir šprote." I got suspicious because a type of a fish would be a very unusual name for a dog, either in Latvian or in English. So I checked the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and the second meaning of this word is a young, small, or insignificant person. In this case, synonyms of sprat would be boy, kid, or youngster. This could be translated into Latvian as poika or sīkais, which seems more fitting for a dog name. And the next type of mistranslation would be false friends of translators. More specifically, when some words sound similar in both languages, the translator might unintentionally choose the translation strategy. If it sounds similar, then that must be it. And the first example comes from the movie Die Hard with a Vengeance. In the scene, a man says to himself the phrase, "Yo ho ho and a partridge in a pear tree." And it was translated into Latvian as "Yo ho ho un putra bumber kokā." So the translator mistook partridge, a type of bird, for the similarly sounding porridge, a breakfast food. Some might also recognize this as a phrase from the holiday song 12 Days of Christmas, where many types of birds are mentioned. And the next example comes from the series How Did I Do It Again? In this case, the phrase pneumatic drill, also known as a jackhammer, was translated into Latvian as pneimoniskais urbis. So once again, the translator mixed up the similarly sounding words pneumatic and mnemonic, and pneimoniskais urbis or pneumonic drill sounds like something straight out of a COVID horror story instead of a technical tool used for drilling. And the next type of mistranslation would be toponyms. Translators had not taken into account the norms of foreign toponym adaptation, meaning that transliteration was not used and a one-word form was not created. My example comes from the series Stundenliebe, or as we know it in Latvian, Mīļš viesulis. The phrase in German was "Willkommen wir in unser Fortnox," but in Latvian it was translated as "Kā mēs tagad iekļūsim savā knoksa fortā," when instead it should have been translated as "Kā mēs tagad iekļūsim savā fortnoksā." The translator had ignored the correct pronunciation of the word nox and used literal translation for the word fort. And to continue, the next challenge would be the translation of profane language. As media translation guidelines suggest, the level of profanity must be lowered in the target language, and vulgarisms definitely should be avoided. My first example comes again from Stunde der Liebe series, Das verdammte Tier hat den ganzen Nacht geschrien. It was translated into Latvian as Tas soda lops ķērca visu nakti. The phrase in the target language became more expressive, and the level of profanity was increased a little bit compared to how it could have been translated. Tas sasodītais dzīvnieks kliedza visu nakti. And the next example comes from a movie that I unfortunately could not remember the title of, but it was shown in the Baltic Pearl Film Festival about 5 or 6 years ago. In the scene, the character was expressing his frustration and mumbled the F word to himself. And in the Latvian subtitles, this word was translated as the 3-letter vulgar expression of Russian origin instead of the mild sasodīts, which is the usual choice when the F word must be translated into Latvian. And I actually remember that even though the scene was not funny, the audience burst out laughing because of this mistranslation. And I will continue with a couple of other examples of mistranslation. The first one comes again from Stunde der Liebe. This is a recurring mistake present in many episodes, and the word limetten, which means limes in English and lime in Latvian, is usually translated as as limetes. The word limetes does exist in Latvian, but it is used to describe a different type of citrus fruit. And the second example comes from the holiday movie Home Alone. The word eggnog, a type of a typically alcoholic holiday drink, was translated into Latvian as gogelmogelis, a type of childhood treat made from egg yolks and sugar. And I think there was no need to use the word gogelmogelis here because there is a term in Latvian, volulitieris, that would be more appropriate. On the positive side, at least the translator managed to maintain the same number of the letter G in the target language. And to conclude, when I look at the examples that I have collected, I realized that a large part of the mistakes could have been avoided if only the translator had been more competent in popular culture tropes, for example, celebrities and popular songs, and also if they had taken into account the norms of adaptation. So that would be it, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Yeah, were there any questions? I actually had,
yes,
I also had a question or a comment, but let's listen to Gianluca first.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you for your presentation, Louise. It was very, very interesting, and so it was so surprising to see that the audience for the film that you did not like, whose name you did not remember, reacted laughing because they were somehow aware of the fact that the translation was wrong. This means that somehow the public has developed some culture of the language that they are listening to. But what really what really I wanted to ask you was about titles. Does your research also include titles for some chance? Because in my language, like in Italian, generally foreign titles are translated sometimes very, very poorly. And I think a couple of years ago, the film on the Dreyfus affair came out, and its name was L'Affaire Dreyfus in French, and in Italian it was translated as La spia e il maresciallo, which is more or less, let's say, the spy and well, it's a military degree, like a colonel or something, as if the public didn't know the importance of the Dreyfus affair. So did you notice this also happening in Latvian, or would you say that the titles are translated in a good, like literally, or in an acceptable way?
Thank you for the question. I think that mistranslation of film titles definitely is a recurring issue in Latvian. Also, I have personally, well, I think I have noticed some, but I cannot like name them now. But this certainly is a topic of discussion because, for example, when there are films that include some sort of a metaphor or epithet of in the English language, it can be very hard to translate it directly into Latvian while maintaining the meaning as well. So it is a common practice to come up with some to come up with a title that vaguely resembles the topic of the film.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was asking this because sometimes it can be very cultural. You know, during the Romantic Age, Germans did not, well, of course, there were no films at the time, but book titles and even the contents of the books were translated literally, avoiding adaptation to the culture of destination. And so I was wondering whether it could have been different in Latvia or not. But anyway, thank you for the insight. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
If you allow, I would like to comment on this question about the translation or mistranslation of titles of the films. There have been several studies dedicated to that topic, and according to the researchers, this is more of a question of marketing than translation. These titles that we perceive as mistranslations, they are actually were chosen to attract the public, and it isn't really a mistranslation. It is a well-calculated move. And I had a question to you about that partridge in a pear tree.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really aware of the context, but don't you think that this bird in a tree could be skipped altogether? Because according to the dictionaries, this "and the partridge in a pear tree," which is the last phrase in the song "The 12 Days of Christmas," is actually used at the end of a list. So it could actually be translated like "and all the rest" or something like that. Did we really need to keep that partridge in the translation?
Well, that could also probably be an option, to just to omit the second part of the phrase. The scene was as follows: a man was working on to disarming a bomb, and he murmured this phrase just as a, well, I suppose a good luck charm before cutting the last wire. And well, it's probably possible to omit it altogether.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And yes, that was our last presentation. Thank you everyone for listening and participating. And I do hope we meet again in May at our conference, topical issues in translation studies. We will announce the date, and we will also distribute the call for papers later on when we know the date. And we hope to see you as presenters, not only as spectators. Thank you so much, and till next time.